projects have been taking advantage of new developments for creating database and digital tools to make searchable images of different kinds and periods, illuminations, paintings, printed illustrations, stamps, etc. Digitization is often fostered by research projects, and we have gathered today here different brilliant ones, I am happy to say. But how do we handle this process? What are our critical and technical choices? Which standards do we adopt? And how do we sustain our online collections? So the reason for today's workshop comes from the reality that the projects involving the digitization of images and digital images could benefit enormously from mutual exchange and collaboration in order to discuss and improve current methodologies, which are constantly evolving, and to open up new threads of research. It also comes from our own personal experience. Matilda and I started collaborating with each other in 2016 when we were both in Oxford, and the potential of such a collaboration together with the visual geometry group in Oxford was immediately obvious, and she will tell you more about it. Now, it is painfully true that as of today, many digital projects still do not interact with each other, running the risk of becoming ivory towers, with serious issues concerning their long-term sustainability and afterlife. So this workshop is intended to create a platform of exchange and to start what we hope will be a long-lasting conversation. To be on the safe side, Matilda and I decided to still hold it online, but we do hope that it will have a follow-up next year and perhaps this time in person. We had a great response from the public and we thank you very much for it. And again, let me say that Matilda and I are very grateful to each of you who could join us today to share your work. And I think I will hand on to Matilda, please, if you want to take the
Thank you, Barbara. Yes, just a couple of words. Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much to all of you for joining us. As some of you might know, while doing my PhD at the University of Oxford within the 15th Century Book Trade Project, I contributed to the realization of the 15th Century Illustration, which is a database that was launched in 2018 for tracking and researching the use and reuse of printed illustrations in 15th century editions. Later, the work started developing, and with Barbara and with the help of the Visual Geometry Group of the University of Oxford, we started working at the 1516, a database which applies the same technologies, but to 15th and 16th century printed images. As we all do, I think, over the years and talking to colleagues and Barbara, obviously, and other friends, I have come across so many different and super interesting projects working on similar topics, using sometimes similar technologies and facing similar challenges. And I've often been in the sort of conversations where we said, how nice would it be to bring together everyone in a room to meet up and discuss and share knowledge, ideas, and perhaps solutions, and at least knowing, what other people in the field are doing or trying to do. Also, as a good way to positively question our research and our own practice, making sure that we are taking advantage of all the available technology, for instance, or not spending time reinventing any wheels, and making sure that we are working in a way that communicates and perhaps even potentially collaborates with others. So this is the spirit in which today's meeting was conceived. We have planned, as you have seen from the program, a whole morning of project presentations, and I thank our amazing speakers for that again, which will ideally pave the way to the afternoon, which will be dedicated to more hands-on discussions, open to invited participants only. So the fact that we're having these discussions in the afternoon is the main reason why, unfortunately, we did not plan a lot of time dedicated to questions this morning. You will have seen that there will be a remark session to wrap up the morning in the end. But in the meantime, please do feel free, if you have any questions for the speakers, to use the chat, to write your questions directed to the participants, and we will do our best to pick at least some of them at the end and to discuss them. Nonetheless, as Barbara said, We were absolutely delighted by such an enthusiastic response from you all, and we really hope that there will be other occasions for which will be designed for a more extensive discussion with the public as well. Now I have a very important final reminder for our speakers. Please do mind your clock and stay in your design time slot. This is very important as the morning is going to be very long and we have to start again early this afternoon. We have been told to be merciless with speakers who do not finish in time. And I'm afraid we will really have to give you, the 2 minutes time. So please be aware of it. Do your best to mind your clock and forgive us if at some point we just say you have to stop. Now, without further ado, I would like to introduce you to the first speakers of our first session, which, as you will see, it's not that necessarily devoted to specific projects, but more to transversal technologies and methodologies that a lot of us have come across with while working on images. In this sense, I'm very happy to have as first speakers Hans Brandhorst and Etienne Postumus from the Iconclass iconographic system with a presentation about annotation, standardization, and collaboration. Hans and Etienne, please, if you want to start and share your screen.
I would like to share my screen, but I get a message that the host disabled my screen sharing. So
and now we will enable it, I think.
Okay.
I hope so.
Is this on your time or mine?
Thank you, Elena.
Okay. Is it okay? Can you see my screen? Great. Well, I hope you all are wide awake also across the ocean, because I will try to take you immediately quite deep into illustrations in an early modern book history. As you can see on this first slide, we're going to look at some aspects of the work of Erasmus and authors of emblem books, and I've chosen Andrea Alciato. Erasmus as a source of inspiration of emblems has been recognized from the 16th century onward, as you will all know, and here's a glimpse of the hundreds of adages listed in a massive index compiled by Honest Tullius in his 1621 edition of Alciato's. 200 illustrations with short poems, which was blown up to a book of over 1,000 pages. The proverb that probably inspired more emblems than any other is the famous adage festina lente, make haste slowly, as Erasmus explained already was used on coins by Emperor the Emperor Augustus. As you can see, the concept of slow haste was expressed in many ways, many different ways, forms both in text and images. To get a grip on such an array of forms, it is practical to reduce the variety of our vocabulary by using a classification, and there's no surprise there for anyone who's ever heard me talk. The classification I'm illustrating here is the Iconclass classification, which is a standard way of describing and indexing pictures. There is a persistent misunderstanding about Iconclass. So here I'm showing an example of how the system covers both very small concrete details and broad abstract ideas in a variety of languages, all using the same encoding. The idea of grouping is quite old, and here is a second screen showing how Iconclass in more than one language, not just in English, covers what I call the iconographic continuum. So you can see even Japanese is included at the moment, thanks to our Japanese colleagues who translated Iconclass. The idea of grouping concept is quite old. Here's an example of the index on commonplaces from the 1559 edition of the Adages, where proverbs are grouped together under commonplaces like haste and slowness. those commonplaces too can be quite easily translated into concept from this shared vocabulary Iconclass. Now, the wonderful website Alciato at Glasgow, almost 20 years old now, which I'm sure you probably will all know, makes this connection between Alciato's emblems and the adages of Erasmus explicit. The adages, when they knew that an adage was inspirational for an emblem, was annotated. And the annotated are like static footnotes in a book. Another book by Erasmus, the Parabole, was also used as a source of inspiration for many emblems, but there was no annotation of the Parabole in the Glasgow site. Here's an example of the two books, the title pages of the Parabole, and the instance I'm talking about, the Morosophy by Guillaume de la Perrière. It was already quite known through this article of 1985, which is before the Glasgow emblem site was created, that many of the emblems in La Perrière's Morosophy were based on Erasmus' Parabole. In spite of that fact, as I've shown, those connections were not annotated in the website at Glasgow. Here's just a few examples of the Morosophy's emblems and the way they were based on, in this case, I've used the Toronto Erasmus edition in the English translation, and I highlighted a few of the words that were triggers for the emblems. Now, linking those emblems to the Parabole allows us, in a sense, to indirectly link the Parabole to the controlled vocabulary that was used to index the emblems. But adding those annotations based on this idea, which is not, well, I've called it a new insight, but actually it's a quite old insight, which was sort of overlooked and forgotten. And adding those annotations is technically not possible on the Glasgow site, which is over 15 years old now. And there's a paradox there, because we have an open standard for iconographic vocabulary, and annotations are possible on other sites. This is an example of the Archives platform. And then Archives is a subscription-based platform, so not everyone can annotate. So although it would be a good idea, I think, to annotate the Morosophy in Archives, as you can see here, about 37 of them I've already indexed in that way. So if you query for Parabole, or you do a search for Parabole in the Archives platform, you'll get a lot of additional information which you won't get on the Archives, on the original Alciato site, or the original French emblem site, I should say, in Glasgow. So the idea here is we would manage to filter an existing database for new information. It would be helpful. That's what I would think. The obstacles are not technical. There's someone else talking also. I'm finished now, so I think I've managed to do it within the time shared. And I would now hand over to Etienne, who also has a little presentation about the Iconclass system and the new version that he's working on. Etienne?
Thanks, Hans. That's very impressive time management on your side. So I will try to do the same thing. Let me just share screen. Is it visible yet? Can you see my presentation, or can someone say yes or no?
No, I don't see it. Yes, now it's coming. It's coming.
Now it's visible. Okay. I've also prepared a document that, if you are interested, you can use to add in any comments. And this is just a Google Doc that you can, if you have comments or questions, you can share and type anything in there. And it's also welcome that you can do that during the presentation. Let me just also paste it in the chat, sorry. Where is the chat window? There we go. Right. It has been more than 10 years since the last major update to the iconclass.org website. It's been quite a long time. And the last major change that was done was the linked open data version in 2015. And that's also been quite a while. And since then, not much has happened on the website. But this year, we've actually decided to develop a new release and very much focus on the user experience of Iconclass. I'm also very fortunate at the moment to be jobless and on a sort of a mini sabbatical. And this has enabled me to actually work on the new version of Iconclass and focus on a complete rewrite of the Iconclass system. We're having also some support of a new foundation called the Henri van der Waal Foundation. Henri van der Waal was the inventor, if you want to call it that. He was the creator of Iconclass many years ago. And we have created a new foundation to also support these activities. And we are very happy to be getting support from this foundation. The highlights of the new version will be to use more up-to-date web standards. It's been, as I said, 10 years, and the current Iconclass website is very clunky. It's not very user-friendly. It doesn't work well on mobiles. It uses very old technology. So we want to give it a complete rewrite and bring it up to date with the latest technology standards and make it more user-friendly and more usable. Things like working on mobile phones, on tablets, using a tree-based navigation where you can see notations open at the same time. At the current version, you can only see one notation at a time, and it's not very friendly for navigation. It should be easier to copy and paste notations. We would like to see the bibliography of Iconclass. Every Iconclass notation has a justification of why it exists with bibliographical references, and we'd like to show that in the screen itself. Saving and annotating your own work on the Iconclass website, adding some APIs for linking with museum management systems or catalogs of, for example, if you have a library site and then you would like to link your catalog to Iconclass directly. We'll be adding a discussion forum and adding the fantastic work that's been done by volunteers for other languages, most notably the Portuguese translation, which was done by a fabulous group of volunteers, as well as the Japanese version, which we recently received from a research group in Tokyo. And then there's some other languages which are in progress, and we will also include them even though they are not done yet, like Dutch, Finnish, Polish, etc. And then most importantly, so inserting a drum roll here, images. So we would finally like to add images to the actual Iconclass website itself. It's something that we've been asked about lots and lots in previous times. You will be able to actually upload your own images into Iconclass and then describe your images directly on the site using a simple drag and drop and a storage. This is a question that we've always had with people. I'd like to describe my project with Iconclass, but where do I start? What tools do I use? How do I do this? And so now you will be able to do it on the Iconclass website itself. The images you upload will also become available as IIIF images so that you can share them with other people. And we will be importing a lot of Iconclass collections into the website and make them available and searchable, because we have over the years gathered a huge amount of images, and we would like to make it available freely for people to use and visually see the Iconclass content. And lastly, it should also be possible that you can choose and annotate any IIIF resource on the Iconclass website. So it does mean you don't have to upload any images. As long as you have a IIIF URL, you can just add the URL and then annotate that URL, and the annotations will become available in the IIIF ecosystem. In the last few years, the IIIF standard has become a fabulous resource for anyone working with cultural heritage content. And I think it's crucial that we have first-class support for IIIF within Iconclass to join in the whole system. And I've been speaking with the team at the Anatorius project, and we'll be working on integrating an Anatorius plugin for Iconclass as well. I'm just collecting a bunch of buzzwords. I'm not going to speak about this at length, but I just thought I would mention, I will throw some logos on the screen for those of you who are interested in this and work with these kind of things. It might be a very small group of the attendees of this conference, but you can see some of the bullet points of the technologies we are using. In the interest of time, I'm not going to dive into all of them. I'll maybe just highlight one or two. I've talked about IIIF already. The other one that will be interesting is having a sparkle endpoint within Iconclass that makes it very interesting for the semantic web communities, so that you can search within the Iconclass system in a more structured way, and not only using full text. And
this is the 2 minutes signal.
Yep, thank you. And the last one is also the fabulous linked art initiative from Rob Sanderson, which combines all of the others. It combines a CDOC CRM, IIIF, and structured JSON LD view of the system. And with that, the end. If there's any questions, you can type them in the Word doc I shared. And that is the end. Thank you very much for the opportunity to share this with you.
Thank you very much. And thank you for the exceptional time management from both of you, Etienne and Hans. Now I would move to our second speaker, to our second presentation and third speaker, who is Rembrandt Duits, who's Deputy Curator of the Photographic Collection at the Warwick Institute here in London, where I am as well now, who is going to give a presentation entitled Classifying Early Modern Iconography, the Warburg's Wittkower system in digital form, basically. Thank you very much, Rembrandt. I think all the speakers have now been made co-hosts, so you should all be able to share your screens without.
Yes, I'm going to try now.
Perfect, thank you.
Let me see. Here we are. Okay, why doesn't that? Yes. So I'm just trying to get actually into the PowerPoints. I'm not sure why that's not working. Right, there we go. Yes, I will be talking today briefly about the Warwick Institute Photographic Collection and its ongoing efforts at digitization. I'm sure you will all know the Warwick Institute in one form or another as an institute for art and cultural history that was first founded in Hamburg in 1921 and under dramatic circumstances was evacuated to London when the Nazis came to power in Germany in 1933, and after various iterations in London, finally became part of the University of London in 1944, and was eventually housed in a purpose-built building where it still is today, 1957. And here you see the facade, the original Hamburg building and the modern London building. It's impossible to talk about the Warburg collections without mentioning some of the famous figures from its history. As many of you will also know, the Warburg collections all go back to the personal collections of books and photographs of A.B. Warburg, the by now very famous art and cultural historian from Hamburg. Warburg was among the first generation of art historians to collect photographs as aids for his work, and he did so quite prolifically for his day. We estimate that by the end of his life, he had gathered about 10,000 photos, a sizable collection for that time. Most of the time, he seems to have collected photos in the same way as art historians still do today, based on what he happened to be working on. So a thematic collection arose, but it had various sort of different focuses, and it wasn't very organized. Towards the end of his life, of course, he became interested in photographs and images also as sort of means of communication in their own right, which was expressed in his famous but unfinished project, Mnemosina Atlas. Now, I should stress immediately that a lot of people come to the Warburg Photographic Collection or consult our website thinking that the Warburg Photographic Collection somehow is a representation to do with Warburg's ideas and this Mnemosina Atlas. I have to stress that it is not. In fact, Warburg just left his 10,000 photos behind in a more or less disorganized state. A second figure to mention is Fritz Saxel, who was Warburg's assistant during his lifetime and became his successor as director of the Kulturhistorische Bibliothek Warburg after Warburg died in 1929. It was in fact Saxel who was more or less responsible for the creation of the Institute as a public research institution. Saxel also contributed a large collection of photos of his own. Sorry, I need to stay with Saxel for a second, because he was specifically interested in images from medieval and Renaissance manuscripts. And unlike Warburg, he collected those extremely systematically. So the heritage of that sort of dual collection is still visible in the collection today. There are, in fact, you could say two collections, a general thematic photographic collection and a manuscript section that until recently was organized in a more traditional way by library and shelf markers. Now, Saxel was also the person who, as director, oversaw this migration of the Institute to London. And when in London, he decided, first of all, that now the photographic collection should become a proper department of the Institute. And secondly, he also tried to find jobs for other refugee art historians from Germany, one of whom was Rudolf Wittkower, of course, to become a famous art historian in his own right. And it seems to have been Rudolf Wittkower who first imposed an order on the Warburg Institute photographic collection. And he did so basically during the 1930s. it seems that what Whitcover did was just sit down with a large pile of photographs that he had inherited from Warburg and organize them in a thematic way. The Warburg Library at this point already had a thematic organization. So in a way, it was a logical parallel to that collection to also start organizing the photos by subject, which of course was a unique way of doing things. Most photographic collections, as you know, of art photographic collections are organized by criteria such as artists or school or country, that sort of thing, period. But Whitcover really started building a system that was organized by subject. And interestingly, he did so he was actually in correspondence with the creator of Iconclass, Henri van der Waal, and they seem to have conferred about their ideas at the time, because the roots of Iconclass go back to exactly the same period as when Whitcover was trying to work on his iconographic system. I'm showing you some images from the Warburg photographic collection, which is basically at this moment still housed in this very long room on the first floor of the Warwick Institute in London. There is a large refurbishment of the building coming up, and then the photo collection is going to be moved, but that just as an aside. Now, the way that the collection works is that photos are all housed in these grey filing cabinets in bays. On the side of each bay, you see main categories indicated, like here, gods and myths, literature, magic and science, a very Warburgian type of category. Each category has its own internal organization. It's broken up into various subcategories that are larger or smaller that you see indicated in labels on the drawers. When you open drawers, you find these sort of buff-colored folders, usually various folders nested within one another that break down the classification further. And then when you finally come to the photos, you find a very miscellaneous and variable collection of material that on the level of the photos itself has no further organization. The reason why I show you all this is to indicate that we really think that Whitcover started organizing his photos in a very pragmatic way. In that sense, this system is quite different from Iconclass, which was always sort of abstract and very systematic and with its number codes, etc. Whitcover probably literally sat down with photos and started sorting them into groups, which is how the collection has been treated over the years as it expanded from the initial 10,000 to about 400,000 photos per that we have today. Which means that in one sense, our organization, our sort of classification system is sort of loose and flexible, as opposed to Iconclass. We don't have the sort of rigid structure that Iconclass have. On the other hand, in its pragmatic way, it's a different but related way of covering the whole of at least Western iconography. We've also started trying to expand into non-Western over in recent years. There is, of course, a focus on early modern, which creates particular categories like gods and myths. But in principle, because of its sort of pragmatic approach, our collection could be expanded in almost any direction. Over the years, of course, there has been until about 2010, there was one question that I was asked almost perpetually was, oh, are you going to digitize this? It would be so useful to have this in digital form. And we wanted to do that, never had money for it. Apart from making the collection itself available online, there was another important aspect, of course, to or a rationale for digitization, which is obviously that many images need to be filed in more than one category. And in the pragmatic way that the Warwick system, or the Whitcover system, as I should actually really call it, had been set up, we usually have, well, mostly one copy of each image. So we had to always decide, okay, where does that go? Making it impossible to file images in more than one place. And as you see, a simple image of like the Virgin and Child with 2 saints should really be filed under more than one heading: Virgin and Child saints, and then the individual saints. In a computer system, that's of course easy to do. Because we didn't have any money, in the end, we built an online system ourselves, or rather I did, which has now been online for 11 years, the Warwick Institute Iconographic database, and which has been set up according to the same basic pragmatic method that Whitcover used for the photographic collection, using the same main categories. Initially, we thought that we would stay quite close to Whitcover's system. But once we started working on the digital project, we quickly realized that the way that system has developed over time, with all its sort of contingencies that are built in, wasn't very suitable for an online environment. And we needed to be much more systematic in our approach to things. We have reorganized categories rather drastically. Here is just one example. On your right, you see the old subject classification from the paper collection for subjects to do with the Trojan War. On the left, you see how that section is now organized in the database, which is really much more rigid per event of the Trojan War, and also accommodating many of the medieval texts about the Trojan War that often have additional or variant legends. Another thing that we started doing, and was in some ways, when we started it, quite unusual, was to start incorporating with images from other websites. Our system was always intended to be not just sort of a static representation of the photographic collection as it was in the early 21st century, but to become the main vehicle for future expansion of our own collection. So we have already added collections of images of which we don't have paper copies.
Sorry, Rembrandt, this is the 2 minutes.
I can see the 2-minute signs. One thing that we started doing was to also supplement our holdings where necessary with images that are actually not even on our own website, but on external sites. And this is a form of collaboration that we hope to expand on in the future. Now, to mention briefly, the site is now 12 years old and has a lot of shortcomings, technical as well as in its presentation. So at the moment, we're rebuilding it. We built a whole new data model, of which you see now and which is expressed in XML. I wanted to say a bit more about that, but I'll skip that because of the time. But right now, as we speak, we're working with this London-based firm called System Simulation, who are experts in building museum and collections databases, and who are building a whole new interface for us, both admin and public display interface. And the main feature of that, one of the main aims of that interface to stress is that we hope that in the future on our website, the search will really be primarily image based. So at the moment, it's still very heavily text directed. You have to browse through categories of subject headings in a tree before you get to actual images. And we hope that in the new version, the search will be much more, searching and browsing will become much more visual and thereby intuitive. Yes, and we're also, a second aim is to make the whole thing interoperable. Images are going to be in IIIF, All the metadata are going to be presented in interoperable formats, and so we will be able to, for instance, also link to Iconclass finally, and import Iconclass headings, and share our metadata and images with the joint resource that the FAROS consortium of photo archives is building at the moment. And I think that I can leave things at this point. Thank you.
I was saying that this was very interesting, also very promising, and we all very much look forward to all these transformations and new features. And I hope that there will be more space to discuss the technical side maybe this afternoon. I think it would be very, very interesting for all of us. You have mentioned IIIF, so now I think we can move to the next presentation, which is going to be by Régis Robineau, who is the technical coordinator of the Equipex Biblicima project in Paris, and a subject expert for IIIF. His presentation is going to be about manuscripts, iconography, and beyond in the Biblicima Portal. And I think he has already shared his screen, so I leave the floor to you, Régis. Thank you.
Thank you. Can you hear me fine?
Yes, we do.
Perfect. So hello, everyone, and thanks for having me today. So I'm Régis Robineau, the technical coordinator of the Biblicima project in France, and I'm also an active member of the IIIF community involved in its technical review committee. And what I'm going to present you today is mostly about the iconographic resources available in the Biblicima portal. So first, a few words about what is Biblicima. So it's a French project funded by the Research National Agency and coordinated by the Campus Condorcet, which is a big humanities and social sciences research campus at the north of Paris. And Biblicima as a whole is designed to be a data facility for historians of ancient texts. And the main focus is the history of ancient libraries and the study of the circulation of books from the 8th to the 18th century AD. This project started at the end of 2012, and it was sustained for 9 years, which means the project is about to end now, but it will be sustained on a much longer term, thanks to substantial funding from the French government granted last year. So the project will continue for another 8 years with a broader spectrum, an extended partnership and funding, broader scientific scope, extending to all ancient written cultures, whatever the language and medium. And the main goal of this new project is to build a multi-site digital infrastructure for research and service, entirely dedicated to the transmission of ancient texts in the continuity of the previous project. And Biblicima Plus also creates a national unified portal achieving interoperability of many heterogeneous digital resources and providing easy access to different kinds of original written documentation, but bibliography and research archives, which are relevant for the study of written cultures and the history of erudition. But this is not the main purpose of this talk. So now let's dive into the Biblicima portal as it is now, and more specifically on the iconographic part of it. So one of the starting points of Biblicima could be summarized in this picture, which gives you a sense of how fragmented is the landscape of digital resources about medieval and Renaissance studies in France. You have many different interfaces, sometimes quite old-fashioned, different search capabilities, a large diversity of data models and data formats, and generally a lack of connections and bridges between those resources. So there is a big issue of data normalization, of interoperability, which causes problem to access, to search for and work with the data across technical and institutional boundaries. So broadly speaking, Biblicima is trying to address this kind of problems at different levels, and the Biblicima Portal is one of the levers on the technological side of things. So the Biblicima Portal is a web application focused on the history of collections of books and the transmission of text in the Middle Ages and the Renaissance. Basically, it aggregates data about medieval manuscripts and early printed books coming from many different databases. And it provides unified access to reconciled data on medieval manuscripts and early printed books that you can search for and access in different ways. The first version of this portal has been published in April 2017, and it is updated and enriched on a regular basis. Currently, we have 17 data sets which are aggregated and deeply interlinked within this portal, which represents a total of about 650,000 entities of different types, among which more than 300,000 illumination and decoration, indexed with about 27,000 iconographic descriptors. So this iconographic data specifically comes from two iconographic databases in the initial scope of the project. The first one is Mandragore, the database of illuminated manuscript at the Bibliothèque Nationale de France in Paris. And the second one is Initial by the IRHT, which describes illuminated manuscript from many other public libraries in France. So here are some figures about the two databases. And what can be underlined is that both have IIIF images, but not for all the images. Actually, there is a mix of IIIF and non-IIIF images in these two databases. And each of them is based on a different vocabulary for the indexing. So now let me show you quickly how it is integrated, how the data from these two iconographic databases is integrated and presented in the Biblicima Portal. So basically, there are three main entry points. Of course, you can run a free text search. You can even search for a term in another language. For instance, in English, and if the label of this term has an English form, you can get some results, as you can see here with the term clock, which brings you several descriptors like horloge, horlogerie, or pendulette in French. You can also use a map of places depicted in the illuminations. And this is made possible thanks to the alignment of all the geographic descriptors from Mandragore and Initial with geonames, and thanks to the integration of map coordinates into the data, of course. And next, from the home page of the portal, you also have access to a page which lets you browse the entire iconographic thesaurus. And from there, you can open the different thematic Dewey-based categories and subcategories of the thesaurus, which gives you the list of all the child descriptors of a given category. For example, this one named mythical or literary creatures and animals. And from there, you can open a descriptor page, like centaurs, for example. And what is interesting here on this page is that you have a view of all the available digital images associated with this particular term, descriptor. And this view lets you browse and compare in the IIIF viewer sets of images depicting the same character or the same animal, the same monument, the same object, or the same abstract concept, and so on, regardless of the book they come from. So for instance, you can have, here you have a collection of digitized folios depicting centaurs coming from many different manuscripts, periods, and languages. Of course, each individual illumination has metadata displayed within the viewer, like the title, the caption, the folio number, the shelf mark of the manuscript, other descriptors, and sometimes a date, etc. And below, you have the IIIF logo and the link to the IIIF manifest that represents this collection of images. And this manifest is generated dynamically by the web application and is built based on the descriptor ID. And of course, you can go to the web page of an individual illumination as you wish and have further details about it. So let me sum up a little bit what we've done in order to build this interface and to enable this deep integration and interoperability between Initial and Mondragor. So we first made a mapping between the classes of the Initial thesaurus and the Mondragor thesaurus. And the classes that were only present in Initial were categorized into those of Mondragor. And we have aggregated all the descriptors of both thesauri based on the Mondragor's classification. And we also made an effort to align all the descriptors with linked open datasets and authority files like the BNF, the Library of Congress, the DNB, Wikidata, GeoNames, and Pleiades for places. All of the 27...
Regis, this
yes.
is 2 minutes.
Okay, I'm going to go quickly. So all of the 27,000 descriptors are meant to be integrated into our wiki-based platform, which is openly available on data.biblicima.fr, where we manage all of the authority data in Biblicima and ultimately expose it as linked open data. Okay, so we can go and say a few words about what we would like to do in the future. So first of all, we would like to integrate other datasets on the iconography of medieval manuscripts and early printed books. First of all, the data from the Biblicima Partner Project, the illustrated book in Lyon, and also alignments to Iconclass would be nice to have. And now I'd like to end my presentation by showing you very quickly a work in progress conducted by the Biblicima team. So it's a new interface to explore and query the iconographic data by using several modules that you can combine. So this application will let you browse the entire thesaurus and click to select a thematic category and then a descriptor. You will be able to see the distribution, the chronological distribution of illumination by century, thanks to an histogram that you can also use to filter your query by century. For instance, to get all the illumination from the 4th century that have the 14th century that have a dragon and an elephant depicted in it. And on the right-hand side, you will have an additional set of filters in order to build a multi-criteria query combining one or more descriptors one or more work, authors, illuminators, or places. For instance, to have all the illuminations associated with the descriptor king and attributed to the Jean Colombe workshop. And at any time, you can open Mirador viewer to view all the digital images corresponding to your query and be able to compare and analyze them and so on. And at the top, again, there is the manifest generated on the fly for your query, a manifest that you can reuse elsewhere, import into another application, and do whatever you want with the images that you get from your query. So this is a work in progress, and it will soon be put online on the Biblicima Portal. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Regis, for the wonderful presentation and for this sneak peek into what's coming next. I see that there are enthusiastic reactions in the chat. I would now move to the last speaker of this first session, who is Giles Bergel, who is Digital Humanities Research Officer at the University of Oxford. And in particular, he's talking to us today as Digital Humanities Research Ambassador at the Visual Geometry Group at the University of Oxford. His presentation will be about visual search and the early modern printed image. Giles, the floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Matilda. So, as has been said, I work at Oxford. I work in a computer vision research group of some years standing. Nowadays, computer vision involves overwhelmingly AI type methods, but we use other methods as well. And we have an engagement program for researchers in diverse fields, including the humanities, art history, book history, which is my particular specialism, printed book history, and in cultural heritage more broadly. Here are some examples of some of the kinds of tasks, some of the kind of applications we've done with printed illustrations or printed images. On my left, image matching, which is matching images, clearly, or features, invariant features within images, so fragments of matches matching regions of images. In the middle here is object detection, which is a form of image classification. So the now classic AI find cats type application, except in this case, it's also localized classification. So we want to find not just a cat, but where a cat is in an image, or in this case, generically any kind of illustration, although I'll say something later about the difficulty of pinning down exactly what that is. On the right is a kind of more expansive version of that task, which is image segmentation, which is classification and localization across the entire surface of an image. So labeling all the pixels, if you like. In this case, this is an tunable edition of Dante, and we hope to do some work on Dante editions across various periods, extract all the things like initials, ornaments, text, commentary, individual pieces of type, and map their relationships to each other within editions and within the corpus over time. I'm going to talk, though, about a specific project involving a dataset at the National Library of Scotland, their Chatbooks Printed in Scotland dataset. And I'm going to slightly depart from the brief that I gave in the abstract. So instead of giving an overview of our activities as a whole of computer vision approaches to print studies overall, I'm going to give more of a focused case study, which I think is more appropriate for a short workshop talk, and I'm going to accompany this case study with demonstrations of some of these methods and tools, but also some critical questions aimed to hopefully promote discussion. Okay, so the Chatbooks Printed in Scotland dataset is 3,000 digitized chatbooks, images and texts. So they include OCR data, which isn't used in this for this particular project, which was funded by a National Librarian of Scotland's Fellowship in Digital Scholarship that I had the pleasure of carrying out last year. Here is a chapbook. This is in fact an English chapbook on the left, and a rather nice RTI, reflectance transformation imaging capture of the original woodblock for that chapbook. And you can see some very nice lighting rows that show the grain of the wood, the tool marks and so forth. And on the right left, you can also see that we have a page which is of course composed of various elements, illustrative and non-illustrative. The steps in this project were first of all to find those illustrated pages within a larger corpus of illustrated and non-illustrated pages, and extract illustrations themselves using an object detection algorithm. The tools we used for that were, I'll go through shortly, and then we wanted to match and group the illustrations per block. So we want to identify illustrations of unique blocks using geometric features in their impressions. And again, I'll show the tool we use for that. So step one, finding illustrated pages. So we used the efficient DET object detector, which is a CNN, a convolutional neural network, first released by Google. It's trained, as all neural networks must be. Neural networks require training data, at least in so-called supervised machine learning. It's trained on a large general purpose set of images called Microsoft COCO, common objects in context of things like, as you can see here, buses, pedestrians, umbrellas, and popping out distinguished from the scene as a whole. We took this very general purpose model and retrained it on illustrations themselves. And on the right, you can see a screen cap of the training process. We used an annotation tool developed for this project called BGG List Annotator, or LISA. It's free and open source, as is everything I'm going to talk about. And it provides a very nice interface for going through and labeling the things one is interested in. In this case, it's illustrations, but it could be other features. But I wanted to tell the object detector, bring me back all the illustrations, which it did remarkably successfully and with remarkably little retraining. We were skeptical initially about how well this kind of very general model trained on objects, all kinds of objects in the world, would work for illustrations, but it works really quite well out of the box. And it got better as we retrained it with so-called ground truth, with examples of things we were looking for. There were misses, so false positives, such as the verso of illustrations printed on thin paper. Likewise, a library stamp, a provenance stamp on the bottom left corner of the middle image here, and a false negative. So this is interesting in relation to the task of defining quite what it is that you're looking for in computational terms. Of course, you know, we don't necessarily always have kind of very fixed criteria for things we want to retrieve. This can be problematic when trying to automate that process. And you know, in this case, I had some rather arbitrary criteria of what I considered an illustration for purposes of this research. So I would include these large ornaments at the top of pages because they seem to me, in some sense, to occupy the same kind of visual space as illustrations, more pictorial illustrations. But I didn't want, for example, the small interlinear, these small rules here. So understandably, the detector had some difficulty in understanding quite what it was that I wanted. And this is a benefit of this kind of iterative process of machine learning, that you get to kind of pose a series of queries about your own interests, or if you like, kind of instantiations of your own interests, which the computer will then throw back at you and then maybe ask questions about quite what it is that you're interested in. So that process concluded. It was very efficient. We got out of it a large corpus of extracted illustrations. Step two is to match them, which we use with a piece of software called Vice, VGG Image Search Engine, which I know Barbara and Matilda, others here, have experience of in some of their projects. It uses, unlike these AI-type methods that use neural networks, which are radically black boxes. They're kind of radically self-supervising, although that's not quite the right word, radically self-organizing would be a better way to put it, perhaps, systems. With Vice, we use so-called SIFT features, an older, more established technology, which are these red ellipsoids here you can see are invariant across two images of the same building in Oxford, although they're shot from different angles, and highly applicable to matching illustrations. So I've got a bit of video here that shows this process. This is a Vice instance, which is out of the box. It's completely as you would get if you were to download it for yourself. And I haven't lost my cursor. Okay, here we go. So here we've got illustrated pages. And we had very good metadata from the NLS, from their data set. So I could sort by publisher. And for example, I'll pick, who is I pick here? Hutchinson. And I can immediately get an overview of the visual style of the publisher because I can seeing only the printed pages. I can also immediately see there are some apparently matching illustrations in this set here. So I'm going to go to an example of an illustration which has no metadata. So has very little metadata supplied by the library, just a conjectured date. I will want to search the woodcuts, and I get some results back very quickly out of the 3,000 or so searches. Indexing, I can get a flip view, left, right, flip-flop view, and a visualization of the matched features, allow me to verify that I'm looking at the same thing. And I see in this case, there is quite a lot of information about place of publishing and publisher, and that is therefore a finding of sorts. I also can view, I can upload images from outside the set. I can view clusters, of pre-computed clusters of matching illustrations. So here are sets of 2 matching illustrations, which I would like to be able to go in and annotate. And I'll say a bit more about that. We don't yet have the kind of interactivity, the ability to work and iterate necessarily that I'd like. Here is possibly the second largest, biggest cluster in the grouping. And you can see here again, there's some bibliographic facts or relationships revealed by matching blocks across. If you could see that, which you possibly couldn't. We had different places of publication in 2 of those chapters. Okay, so I'll move on. Interest of time. Vice also has a comparison tool built in, and this is good for kind of finding quite subtle differences here. So this is a really good example of a really good copy of 2 wood blocks. At first glance, or even side by side, they look the same. But if you look in this flip view at the sword, for example, here, or this plume of hair, you know, these are clearly quite assiduous copies rather than impressions of the same block. So a different form of evidence then, or a different relationality than a bibliographic relationship. And this brings up an interesting kind of critical question, which is that what thresholds of variance do we set in order to distinguish impressions from unique blocks? Because blocks can vary in any of the ways that matter can vary. They can get chipped, they can get damaged, they can be printed in various ways, they can be cut down. Here's an example of a block that's been cut down. And Vice will match features within that. But there's a question for the scholar. The scholar needs to ask, you know, quite what are the thresholds of variance that you want to set in order to consider any 2 things to be the same. And that I would suggest is in the Escapee manual. And there's a kind of really nice kind of thoughts on this kind of process thought by Tom Davis, developer Tom Davis, who points out rightly that if you ask an engineer to machine a metal rod a meter long, he or she will ask for what purpose? A meter, exactly a meter long, of course, being a platonic ideal, because they need to find out what kind of tolerances and measurement would be required. And print scholars here will know, and in some ways they may define some part of their work is very much about managing these tolerances, thresholds of variation, such as...
Giles, I give you the 2 minutes.
Thank you. So there, I won't go through these, but people who spend any time looking at print will understand how they are complications in these complicate that kind of naive notion of printing as a set of as generating a set of exactly repeatable pictorial statements in William Ivan's term. I mean, it depends what we call exact, and we see this in kind of other printed images we've worked on. So here's an engraved botanical plate, it's proof and its published form, and some music, the Cini score, touched up by himself, and the various states of Tom Strawshot's portrait of William Shakespeare on the right. Okay, I'm just going to very quickly skip through a kind of experiment that I added on to this. This is fundamentally bibliographic inquiry, which is classification of the illustrations. So the task here is, instead of find matching images of the same object, such as this building, to classify what kind of object is this. This is an aeroplane that can have various forms, which we do with neural networks again, so back to AI territory. And in the chat box corpus, I could find salient shapes, and I could find portraits. Less good at finding ornaments. The visual space of those is quite narrow in some ways and hard to distinguish between things that are similar. But this exercise in classification, again, kind of I would want to use as an exercise in kind of critical inquiry into what, for the purposes of printed illustration study, we mean by the same subject or content of an illustration. And in particular, how we can distinguish expressive relationships, such as copies or versions of the same scene. So there's a historical relationship there from a broader iconographic or stylistic relationship. And I'm aware my terminology is kind of rather naive compared to colleagues who work with iconography a great deal. And it would be interesting to compare these kinds of machine analyses with formal iconography, such as Iconclass. Okay, just to wrap up, people who would like to go straight to the code can download it all from this GitLab site. I'll put the link to it in the chat. This is our pipeline, but it's a rather leaky pipeline that all the pipes aren't yet joined up, and we actively are looking for collaborators who would like to help us join that up. And here is a project page that contains links to the demo I showed, as well as links to the code and to publications. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Giles. Thank you very much for this super interesting presentation and overview of the amazing work of the VGG. I hope that there will be chances to discuss the possible, collaborations or convergences that you suggested maybe this afternoon. I thank all the speakers of this first session. I think it was most interesting and most useful to pave the floor to the rest of the morning and to the afternoon. We now have a 15-minute break scheduled, which is meant to be for coffee or for, taking a break. Thanks a lot, everyone, and thank you to all the speakers.
I think we can resume. It's 10:30, and I will be as strict as my colleague concerning the time. So let's go for it. I'm very, very happy to welcome both Gennaro Ferrante and Ciro Perna, respectively, from the Università degli Studi di Napoli Federico II and from the Università degli Studi della Campania Luigi Vanvitelli. And they will present us the wonderful Dante Illuminated project. And I very, very much look forward to hearing your presentation. So I just leave you the floor to you.
Thank you very much. I will share my PowerPoint. Okay. So I am Gennaro Ferrante, professor of philology of medieval literature and Italian and Latin at the University of Naples Federico II, as Barbara said. My principal research topics are the Italian medieval classics and their early reception. And about that, I want to say that Federico II, my university's methodology in philological research, aims at what we call the global approach, which is both interdisciplinary and multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary and multidisciplinary attitude in studying medieval texts, implying textual criticism, book history, philology, hermeneutics, and political, cultural, and social history. So as a Dante scholar and an expert in manuscript studies, in 2016, I launched the Illuminated Dante project and started coordinating an interdisciplinary research team. The project aims to provide a systematic survey and an accurate description of those early illustrations of Dante's Divine Comedy, miniatures, extended apparatuses, historiated initials, elaborated friezes, drawings, sketches, diagrams, schemes, revealing up to the smallest meaningful reference to the poem or to a commentary accompanying the poem. The cataloging of Dante illustration has been conceived to be digital and online, and naturally accompanied to the correspondent digital reproduction of the images. Along with my research team, we decided since the beginning not to take in consideration the idea of an online image archive of medieval miniatures detached from their original context. But according to Jérôme Bachet's idea of medieval images, image objet, we focused on Dante illuminated manuscript as an indissoluble intertwining of material, textual, and iconographic data. Thus, we delimited a corpus of 277 items. 2/3 of them are concentrated in the major Italian library, and the left 1/3 is held by the most important historical libraries around the world. IDP, which is the short name of Illuminated Dante Project, undertook 3 main actions. Digitizing the manuscript material held in Italian and international libraries, structuring and promoting a full codicological and iconographic description of the manuscript corpus, and configuring an interoperable image archive. As for the first action, digitizing, the protocol for the digitization or for the purchasing of digital images follows with IFLA and FAGI digitization guidelines and for conservative use. Beside the standard digitization, we also launched a more in-depth digital imaging of our corpus using the RTI technology. So we started a collaboration with the UK Leuven's Illuminare department in order to process by their microdome a sample of manuscripts and to detect features particularly significant for codicologic, bibliographic, or historic artistic reasons. An RTI-compatible viewer will be integrated in the next step of our project, so to make the images processed available for end-user research. We currently have now in our physical archive 191 digitized items from a corpus from a 277 corpus, which makes the biggest structured web archive of Dante manuscripts. Currently, we have on our online archive about 40 manuscripts. By the end of this month, we will have about 120 items at all. So this makes the biggest archive of Dante manuscripts at all. As for the second action about cataloging, we started a collaboration with the Italian Centrale Institute of the Unique Catalogue, and for sharing our codicological description of the corpus with their online manuscript catalog, which is Manus Online, which is called the Manus Online, through the XML markup standard known as TIP5. Then we elaborated the decoration section of TIP5, known as Deco Desk on the TIP5 module, by the introduction of the indexable categories such as stylistic attribution, decorative typology, execution technique, and iconography. My colleague and research partner, Professor Ciro Perna, will focus on this latter topic, which is iconography. As for the third action, we decided very early to make our image archive compliant with the current international standard of web interoperability. So we started a collaboration with the IT labs of Naples University and with Biblicima team of the Campus Condorcet in order to install on our image server the IIIF image API and the Mirador viewer in its latest version. So we could finally have this, for example, I don't know, this one, I don't know if I can reach the site, I suppose, yes, this, which is one of the oldest illuminated Dante manuscripts, the Palatino 313, held by the Firenze Biblioteca Nazionale Centrale, one of the oldest illuminated Dante manuscripts available online in a satisfying high resolution. And not only, we can also make some, we can also accompany to this an accurate description of the manuscript articulated in 3 sections. As you can see, a section for the material description, which is really an in-depth and updated material description of the manuscript. A second section, which is the content description, the textual description of our corpus. And a third section, which is the decoration, a dedicated decoration section for each of our image illustration of our corpus. The next, and I finish. The next. I will go to the end rapidly. The next steps of Illuminated Dante project will be from now to the next year to achieve the digitization campaign, to process the RTI imaging of a selection of manuscripts, to integrate an RTA compliant, the RTA compliant Pixel Plus online viewer in our online platform, to deliver a semantic web ontology in order to handle the different database formats used in our native and imported subsets, to transfer the metadata into a new system and complete cataloging, and to relate the keywords category of IDP database to Iconclass in order to enhance in both English and Italian the subcategory 83 Dante Divina Commedia present, which is already present in the Iconclass system, and to turn finally the Illuminated Dante project to Illustrated Dante project, which is the extended version, which will be the extended version of Illuminated Dante project, implying in this case also the printed editions and the in-series drawings containing illustration of Dante Divine Comedy from 15th century until the 20th century. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Gennaro. We can now give the word to your colleague Ciro Perna. And I remember you did ask for 20 minutes, so 10 and 10, so you have until 10:50.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. And thanks to the organizers for the invitation. I would like to focus on some aspects related to the project, which concern cataloging and searching. That is an overview on the structuring of the database, starting from the back end, and some examples, I hope, of research from the front end. Let me share the screen. Can you see it?
Yes.
Okay. First of all, I will start showing how we upload a new codiconological unit, a new manuscript into the database. The data are partially imported from the description sheet that we have already produced on Manus Online, that is, as Professor Ferrante said, the official manuscript database of the Ministry of Cultural Heritage, our partner. And as you can see, the data entered in Manus are integrated in our database in this page called the Generale. See the button on top left, by the following informations. Indexing of the manuscript in the main existing repertories, as Rodewig, Bertelli, or Boschi-Roti and Census of Dante Commentaries by Salerno Editrice. Then a brief description of the artifact in the free field, the production area of the manuscript, graphic typology. For example, it is possible to distinguish between various types of cursive or Gothic, from the so-called bastarda cancelleresca to the littera textualis and some others. A number of triplets in each folio, type of rubric, and possible presence of the coat of arms. At this point, from the second section, the properly iconographic part of the cataloging work begins. At top, you can see the button Progetto Decorativo. From the surface of the general illustrative program of the manuscript, we can arrive at depth. That is the description of each single image inside. Here you can select various cases, if the iconographic project is unitary or not, if several artists have worked even after a long time, the typology of the ornamental initial letters or of the frieze, foliate or other type, the possible presence of instruction to the illuminator, that are traces of teamwork that could indicate also the type of cultural approach to Dante's poem. Then let's go now even deeper to see how every single image on the manuscript can be catalogued. For each image, open the screen you see and enter the first information relating to the position of the image on folio, as well as the link of the IIIF manifest. The next buttons that you can see on top, Attribuzione and Tecnica Esecutiva, allow you to enter data related to the artist, the dating, the production environment, the technique used. Now, I would like to focus on the section that represented one of the most demanding challenges of the Illuminated Dante project team, because it truly represents all the efforts we have made not only to decrypt the image, but also to catalog it as precisely as possible in such a way to allow the widest and most articulated research possibilities for users, even from a multidisciplinary point of view. Let's start with the first box that you can see, in which must be entered all the data relating to the relationships between the image and the text of the Divine Comedy, and its possible paratexts, such as rubrics or glosses, which in many cases influence even more than the poem itself, the choices of the illustrators. It is also possible to classify the relationships between the image and internal context, the Commedia's topography, or with the external context, other iconographic traditions, and to specify the diegetic level of the illustration, first or second level narrative. For example, Dante speaks with Ugolino or Ugolino and his sons in the tower. Instead, in the second box, the image is cataloged through three fields, macro subject, subject, and keywords, as you can see. We have elaborated from reading the poem and analyzing the images, of course, about 300 possibilities for each of two categories, macro subject and subject. How can we define the macro subject? We can consider it a sort of indexing of the iconographic subjects based on the progression of Dante diegesis. Within a macro subject, it is possible to find different subjects, as in the case you see, in which in the context of the Golosi macro subject, glutton, various subjects are found naturally related to both Canto 6 of Inferno and Cornice 6 of Purgatorio, where the gluttons, of course, are punished and purged. Now, I want to show you some examples of research from our portal and its potential. The first, start the video. Okay. The first shows how can work our subject index. In the specific case, trying to insert the search field in the search field, Dante e Virgilio incontrano Gerione, Dante and Virgil meet Gerion. It is possible to view all the manuscripts that contain this subject. In this case, is the wonderful Palatino 313. You can open the description where you can find all the data I mentioned earlier in the yellow box, from the type of image to the relationships with the text. And on the left side, the link to the Mirador viewer, where you can view and zoom the image.
2 minutes.
Next one. Yes, next one, another, is the keyword research. In this case, we could type 2 words such alichino and maschera, mask. We visualize one result, which is the Chantilly manuscript 597 of the Condé Museum. The keywords, you can select also the Dante's topography if you want here. The keywords are found in the description when you open it. Yeah. And you can also open the manuscript in Mirador and see the amazing miniature in the bas de page with all the male branche, including, of course, the devil Alichino. Last one. This one is the manuscript research using our map, where you can see all the cities with their libraries. Here, for example, Florence, Riccardiana library. And if you click, the list of manuscripts opens with the possibility of viewing and operating again through our viewer. I hope we can discuss about other characteristics of our database during the roundtable. And for now, thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, both to Gennaro Ferrante and Ciro Perna. This is wonderful, and I do hope we will discuss this more this afternoon. I now give you the floor to Maria Alessandra Panzanelli Fratoni and Maria Alessandra Bilotta, who will present us the study of illustration and decoration partners in law manuscripts and books, the projects Ius Illuminatum and Ius Commune Online. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me, I suppose, and see the screen? I will talk for the first part of this presentation, and we are talking about 2 different projects which have started talking to each other in relation to the descriptions of illustrations and decorative pattern. I've been talking about the Ius Illuminatum project, of which I am the principal investigator. The Ius Illuminatum Online is a database that aims to produce a corpus of legal texts found both in manuscripts and printed editions between medieval and early modern. It was based on previous research devoted to 15th century legal editions and is funded by the Programma Giovani Ricercatori Rita Levi Montalcini and is based at the University of Turin. As said, it was based on previous research done within the 15th century book trade project already mentioned by Matilde. We met during that period of time, and particularly it was inspired by working on texts, and particularly on the database Text Inc., which is dedicated to produce a corpus of text of 15th century editions. The results of such research was published already a couple of years ago, and it provided an overview of the publications and inspired me to look both at manuscript and later editions in order to produce a tool which enables scholars to study the transmission of the text over the long period. So Ius Commune Online has been conceived as a database which aims to relate to any other relevant databases, starting with TextInc, of course, which provided the structures model and also data for starting the new database. It also aims to talk to HBB which means for the descriptions of copies, and with Manus Juridica, which is a just started special project within Manus, just mentioned, and devoted to legal manuscripts wherever preserved. In News Comune Online, the focus are texts. And I'm showing you the backstage because the database is still in progress. The construction of the database is in progress now. So I will show you how detailed descriptions is provided in the database, where a section of the database is dedicated to illustrations in terms of providing detailed descriptions of textual units, but also detailed descriptions of bibliographical analysis, included illustrations and decoration patterns. They are also linked to a section where information on subject and literary genre are provided, which together will improve our understanding of the text, which has to do in order to provide a good descriptions also of illustrations in such a subject area like law, which is complicated. So we need to identify the genre, and together genre and subject can help scholars to better understand the illustrative images and pattern of decoration, to which a portion is dedicated, like, sorry, I'm going to the here, together with the layout. Indeed, as the interest of the database is on text, the layout is also important, and a list of different layouts is provided in order to help to provide a consistent description of the layout by clicking on all the relevant elements. And a list of examples is provided, like this one, where which includes all the most relevant layout for legal text, starting with a very traditional layout for legal manuscript with the textus inclusus, the 2 columns, also this decoration included in the text, which was reflected in the early printed editions, then how they changed with time from manuscript from the early printed editions onwards, and how they changed again, including illustration made by hand on printed editions, to conclude, so to speak, with later editions where the whole layout changed to include other pattern and tools to provide and include decoration. In this section of the database, as well as in Manus Juridica, we want to provide a brief but consistent and clear description of illustrations and decorative pattern. And for this purpose, I contacted Maria Alessandra Bilotta, who is directing a project on the Ius Illuminatum on legal manuscript on decoration and illuminations in legal manuscript to elaborate together guidelines for a synthetic but clear and consistent and full descriptions of illustrations in legal text. We'll be talking in this afternoon, this afternoon, what we have done so far. And for the moment, I leave the floor to Maria Alessandra to show her project and what she's been doing now.
Thank you.
Thank you very much to Barbara and Matilde for the invitation. Thank you, Maria Alessandra, for the presentation. And now I share with you my little PowerPoint. I hope to be not very long. I'm sorry. So this project, Ius Illuminatum, is a project that very young. He is 3 years old, so is not very old, and is begin with the idea to found my this group, research group Jus Illuminatum, begin with the organization of this exhibition in Portugal, in National Library of Lisbon, about juridical illuminated manuscripts in libraries of Portugal. The organization of this exhibition permit us to understand that Portugal has a lot of juridical illuminated manuscripts that wasn't well known and that wasn't online for the study and for the research. So after my postdoctoral research, when I became a researcher at the School of Science and Humanities in Nova University in Lisbon, I proposed to found a group, international group of researcher, art historian, but not only art historian. We have also a group of other specialists that work with us, paleographer, codicologists, and we decided to study juridical illuminated manuscripts in different parts of Europe. This is a map of all the where are indicated the member of this group and the country that are yet studied and on this topic. We have a website, and in this website that is a website of presentation of our group, I decided to put a legal digital scriptorium Portugal. This is a very simple, very simple, but useful resource, because it's a list of manuscripts illuminated that are online, available online, from the site of the different libraries of Portugal. Here you can see some manuscripts that came from the National Archives of Lisbon, and I show you also some manuscripts that came from National Library of Lisbon. It's very simple, because you have only to click on the image and you go to the site of the National Archive, and you can see the description of the manuscripts and also the image. And the same you can do, for example, with National Library of Portugal. You have to click the image and you go to the website of the National Library, where you find the description of the manuscripts in a catalog, and also different formats of the digitalization of the manuscripts. So you can have the photo, the PDF, and you can take these manuscripts in your computer. And this is the digitalization of one of these manuscripts. Is very simple to use, and you can study these manuscripts and see these manuscripts. Is important. Why Jus Illuminatum was important? Because before the foundation of Jus Illuminatum group, these manuscripts wasn't available online. The manuscripts are juridical manuscripts of the National Library in Portugal. So we have speak with the direction of the library and the director that is very open to all that is useful for researcher, facilitate the digitalization of these manuscripts. What is my task in the project of Maria Alessandra in Jus Commune Online is to help to find a parameter to describe correctly and in a useful form juridical manuscripts online. So thank you very much. And I don't know if Maria Alessandra want to say something more.
Thank you very much.
With the time, we'll be talking about this in the afternoon, I suppose, right?
Thank you very much to both Maria Alessandra for your wonderful presentation and collaboration, which is really a wonderful example of starting cooperation, which that's what we hope for. And I will give you the floor to my colleague Jost Depuydt, who is curator of typographical and technical collections at the Museum Plantin Moretus in Antwerp. Thank you very much for being here. And he will talk about opening up the collection of 14,000 woodblocks of the Officina Plantiniana. So Jost, the floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Okay, I want to thank the organizers for the invitation to give this presentation here today. I will tell you about our efforts to open up an extraordinary collection of nearly 14,000 woodblocks. With these examples of true craftsmanship, book illustrations and other decorative elements were printed in the Officina Plantiniana, the Plantin printing house in Antwerp. The woodblock collection of the Plantin Moretus Museum in Antwerp consists of nearly 14,000 blocks and covers a wide variety of subjects. Some blocks have been preserved very well, while others have greatly been affected by woodworm. To address this problem, all the blocks were treated in the 1960s with a woodworm product, which later turned out to be very toxic. As a result, consultation of the blocks was substantially difficult. Our predecessors at the museum not only treated the blocks against woodworm, but they also sorted the blocks by subject and numbered them. Once this operation was finished, they have made a print of every single woodblock and brought these prints together in 5 large volumes. Until recently, these 5 volumes filled with images were the only access to this collection. Last year, we planned to celebrate the 500th anniversary of Christophe Plantin with several events and exhibitions. Unfortunately, most of the events had to be cancelled or postponed because of the corona pandemic. Nevertheless, we succeeded in promoting our woodblock collection with a campaign Impressed by Plantin. In March last year, we launched an image base with high-resolution scans of all 14,000 woodcut prints. People can now browse or search by keywords to get inspired by the rich iconography of these centuries-old woodcuts. In the summer of last year, 8 artists from the Antwerp creative scene were engaged as ambassadors. They are active in very diverse disciplines such as jewelry design, illustration, animation, installation, typography, and graphic design. They were asked to create new artistic works and give insight in the creative process through their social media accounts. Earlier this year, their artworks were exhibited in the museum, a nice mix of contemporary styles and techniques inspired by age-old motifs. Let's have a look at some striking examples. El Tipo made a reinterpretation of an ornamental initial. The final result is a mosaic with inlaid wood. He has explicitly chosen to use wood as material to refer to the original woodblocks. Or this emblematic scene inspired Jasper van Gestel to sketch a startled cat surrounded by dancing mice. This scene ended up as a tattoo on a friend's leg. In November last year, we also launched an open call for graphic designers. From 105 candidates, a jury selected 20 designers for the print project. They created an artistic poster design inspired by the woodcuts from our collection. This project was a close collaboration with SuperCollect, an organization that brings artists together around the printing press. SuperCollect provided the perfect print of the artistic design with respect for craft and quality. But let us now return to the collection of woodblocks. Recognizing the enormous historical value of this collection, The museum has recently finished a digitization project with funding from the Flemish government. One of the biggest challenges for the project was the enormous amount of blocks that had to be photographed, front and back, within a limited time frame of 1.5 years. Furthermore, all woodblocks had to be photographed in a consistent manner. We therefore set up an in-house studio and systemized the process. The camera was set up perpendicular from above. Breaking light caused some textured areas to appear completely dark. To fill these shaded areas with light and to reveal more characteristics, a reflective box was made with 4 wide reflective panels. Every camera reads color differently. Different lenses also have an effect on the color. That's why color management was an important part of the workflow. All digital photos were edited the same way and then uploaded in our digital assets management system. Let's have a look at some interesting results. When comparing these blocks side by side, we can clearly see differences in cutting techniques. The recessed areas in the first block are almost perfectly smooth, as if the block itself was intended as a finished piece of art. It contrasts greatly with the second block, in which we see that large pieces of wood were chucked out of the block, leaving the image with a sort of contour line. The third block, again, shows an entirely different technique with small uniform gouged lines. The fourth block shows horizontal uniform carved lines on the right, but a different technique on the left. We also find unusually shaped blocks. When comparing them with the illustrations in printed editions, we often find that these cutouts were used to print text closer to the image. For this image in Lobelius's Kruidboek of 1581, a first cutout, marked in blue, was made to add text next to the leaf. In a later edition, 2 more cutouts, marked in red, were made to add the text next to the 2 flowers. The 14,000 blocks were never systematically described, so no metadata existed at the beginning of our project. For easy searching in this huge collection, all woodblocks are now being described in our collection database. The collection contains very diverse subjects, each of which requires its own approach. Firstly, I will focus on the challenge to describe the 4,000 botanical images. Here you see a typical description of a botanical woodblock in our woodblock collection, in our collection database, sorry. We try to reconstruct the printing history of the block by listing all known editions in which the block was used. We also aim to list all plant names given in the captions of the illustrations in these editions. Since the name given to this plant is not consistent in these various botanical editions, we couldn't use an historical name as title for this woodblock. So we decided that we should try to identify every single plant and give it a modern plant name, both the scientific name in Latin and a common name in the vernacular, Dutch and English, depending on the language setting of the user interface. Fortunately, we could rely on the work of others who have already tried to identify botanical illustrations, such as the Dutch website Plantaardigheden. They have systematically screened Dodoens's Kruidboek of 1554 and his edition of 1644. So far, we have been able to identify about 85% of the 4,000 botanical illustrations. For the remaining woodblocks, we call on the experts at Meijse Botanic Garden. They are very enthusiastic to look at these historical botanical illustrations. The botanical woodblocks are a very substantial part of the woodblock collection, 29%, only outnumbered by the blocks of ornamental initials, 33%. In this description of an ornamental initial, you can see that we have added a series title for the alphabet to which the letter belongs. We have also described the iconographic scene, here the birth of Jesus. Where it is possible, we also list some appearances of the initial in printed editions. It's nearly impossible to list all appearances of a specific letter in all the existing printed editions for 9 generations of printers at the Plantin printing house. Nevertheless, we hope that the digitization of many books from our collection by Google Books, in combination with the help of artificial intelligence tools, like the ones Giles showed us this morning, might help us to list as many appearances as possible. The initials used in Plantin's time, the second half of the 16th century, have already been studied and documented very well. The initials used by his successors have been much less studied. However, one of our predecessors at the museum published an article in the 1940s about woodcut initials acquired by the Plantin press in the 18th century. He referred to the woodblock collection in general, since the blocks were not yet individually numbered. On the other hand, he also referred vaguely to existing proof prints of these blocks. By sheer coincidence, we have found a compilation album in our collection in which dozens of proof prints of ornamental initials were collected. This accidental find was a great source to identify some of the designers and woodcutters. But the annotated proofs were also a great help in identifying the saints depicted next to the initials. So far, we have identified about 250 different saints. Adding the name of the saint to the description helps to distinguish different initials of the same letter. And so I have come to the end of this presentation. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much to you, Jost. It's a wonderful collection and wonderful project, I already know, and I look forward to talk to you more this afternoon. Thank you for sticking to the time. I was wondering whether to tell you, but I know you're always very on time. Okay, and I now give the word to Drew Thomas from the University College Dublin, who will talk about the project Ornamento Europe, an atlas of the visual geography of the Renaissance book. So thank you very much for joining us, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. I'm very happy to be here, and thank you for extending the invitation. Let me share my screen. First off, I'd like to say, I'd like to extend regrets from my colleague, Sandy Wilkinson, who has teaching requirements today and lecturing all day, so he isn't able to be here with us. So I told him I would hold down the fort. Hope I do not embarrass him. I'd also like to say that I was at University College Dublin for most of this research, but I've started a new postdoc position in St. Andrews with the Universal Short Title Catalog. But let's talk about Ornamento. Ornamento is a resource that aims to be a searchable repository of the illustrative, decorative, and ornamental features used in early modern printing of the 15th and 16th centuries. I originally became interested in studying woodcuts during my doctoral research, particularly the reuse of title page borders on pamphlets during Martin Luther's Reformation. Now, Sandy was the one who originally developed the concept of Ornamento by focusing on the Iberian book world. Over the past 2 years, I've held an IRC fellowship at University College Dublin, where we expanded Ornamento with great success to include the wider European print domain. In total, we've created a resource with 5.67 million items, which come from 164,000 different editions published up to 1600. For the math nerds watching, you'll notice the discrepancy at the bottom doesn't quite add up. And that's there to remind me to point out to you that we had around 20,000 books which had no items of interest and thus were not included in Ornamento. For especially during the incunabula period, there were many items without any woodcuts or anything in them. But we still have to look through them in order to identify them as containing them. So here is a screenshot of our internal resource hosted on our project server in Dublin. I just have screenshots for today, but if anybody would like a live demonstration, please contact me privately and I'd be happy to set something up. We have the ability to search by bibliographic metadata, which although these books came from multiple different institutions, the metadata has been standardized to assist with the analysis. At the bottom, you'll also notice that we have the ability to filter the results by color, which a feature we had no intention of originally including, but was quite useful, I discovered, in finding images for this presentation. Always nice. We can search by year, printer, title, author, language, genre of book, etc. And here you can also, in addition to bibliographic information, you can search by image classification. And these are just a few of the classifications we have. Here is an example of our results page. You get a crop of the illustration taken from the page and some facets on the left providing some statistics. This search just represents general illustrations that have not been further classified into a sublevel. And you can see here we have, 63,000 from Venice, 51,000 illustrations from Lyon, and so on. If you click on one of these items, you'll be taken to the record page. On the left, you have cropped versions of the woodcuts, and then a full page on the right that provides the context of the layout. Beneath that, which you can't see right now because it's a screenshot, is the full bibliographic data for the edition, links to the full digital edition on the library website, the library shelf mark, links to the library catalog record, and any rights statements. And where possible, we also include links to IIIF manifests. But of course, we know not every library has implemented IIIF. But we hope that changes. Now, if you, in addition to having a search interface for woodcuts, we also have the ability to match the items to each other to see different impressions. So if you click on one of these illustrations, you're taken to a match page where you can see the other impressions of the woodcut. You can see that this woodcut was used at least 10 times over a 16-year period, all by the same printer, Hans Luft, famous Bible printer in Wittenberg. I wanted to show you another example that has more than one printer. So this is an illustration featuring Martin Luther and the Elector of Saxony. And here you can see it was used nearly 40 times over a 47-year period between 1544 and 1590 by at least 13 printers in 4 cities. Based on the facets, most of these books were published, most of these were in Wittenberg. You can see 33 of them. Now, 13 printers is a lot. So to me, that warrants further investigation. But what this means is you can investigate how woodcuts were shared among printers, or you can see how they were passed from one printer to the next. And then it's also important to see when it's used in different cities to check whether these are the same woodblock or maybe they've been copied. Giles touched on that some in his presentation. Now, you notice there's check boxes next to each thumbnail. So if you did want to compare them, you can select 2 and press compare, and they will be loaded into Oxford's, the VGG's image comparing tool. So here you get a nice side-by-side view, and you can even, I like the little slider they have, which really helps you identify if there's any differences within woodcuts. It allows you to compare images more closely. So that is Ornamento in a nutshell. Now I kind of want to talk about the methodology we use to create it. I'll briefly focus on it. The first step was obviously to create a census of what books have been digitized by libraries. We integrated information from union catalogs like the Universal Short Title Catalog or VD16 or ESTC. as well as Gallica, archive.org, and lots of individual library catalogs. And then after what felt like a year of my life just downloading books, we trained a convolutional neural network to identify pages that have items of interest. Now, of course, a majority of the pages we downloaded have no items of interest, but nevertheless, you still have to process them all in order to discover that. And I won't go into too much detail. Giles' presentation, he mentioned how the Vice image matching, which we used as well. And here we extracted, we didn't just identify pages that have items of interest, but also the coordinates where on the page those items are. And then also it would apply classification to the type of woodcut being used. So for example, just based on classifications, it would classify ornate letters, title page borders, printers' devices, armorials, which were a bit difficult because you often see armorials in book plates, which are items that we don't want to include in the project, or library stamps. Botanicals, and I love seeing those botanical woodcuts from the previous illustration in the Plantin collections. That's really fascinating. Music, coins, ornaments, headpieces, scientific drawings, among many others. Equestrian, we found lots of horse harnesses, surprisingly. We then, instead of having a live version of Vice, we just went ahead and ran Vice on every single image in the collection of the open source software that Giles was talking about. This is how we generated the match pages. So we just took the output of the Vice matches and collected that information into a database. So I've spoken a bit on how we built Ornamento, but now I'd like to show you some of my research showing you what Ornamento makes possible. So this project was developed with a focus on book history. How often were woodcuts used? Did printers share, trade, or copy woodcuts? How long were they in activity? Ornamento is useful in highlighting these types of trends and document exchange, helping us better recreate the networks that made up the early modern printing industry. But now I would also like to show you a few examples of how Ornamento has proven useful in identifying anonymous books. Here's an example from VE16, the German national catalog, where the place of publication and the printer are unknown. You can see on the first page, there is a large ornate initial, an S. By looking at these matches found in Ornamento, we found there are at least 4 other impressions, 3 of which come from Cologne and were used in the same years. So really this narrows down our investigation. It's likely this is a book from Cologne, and now we can investigate further. Another example is, this is a book that lists no year, although the National Catalog record states it infers 1527, and this is because the end of the introduction lists the year 1527. But because Ornamento tracks the use of woodcuts, you can often track instances of wear. And if you see at the top left here, there is a crack in the title page border. Now this crack also appears in an impression that lists 1528 in the imprint. And then another impression that Ornamento matched it to, also printed in 1528, has no crack. So it's quite certain that this crack likely appeared in the year 1528. And if you look at the image on the left, there is the crack at the top left, but there's also a crack at the top right, which does not appear in our original book we were looking at. So it's likely that was printed between these 2 publications, which means 1528 is likely the year of publication, even if the text was written in 1527. I've also used Ornamento in my work investigating counterfeit Reformation pamphlets. A lot of my research focuses on the counterfeiting of Martin Luther's works. So I'm going to put in a shameless plug. If you happen to be near Berlin, I've curated an exhibition on Luther's counterfeits currently at the Reformation Research Library in Wittenberg. But back to the counterfeits. So here we have a pamphlet before you that has a Wittenberg imprint. And on the inside is a large ornate letter D. Ornamento was successful in finding a match to that letter. And this match is in a book that clearly lists in the colophon that was published in Basel by Adam Petrie, a well-known counterfeit printer. One last example, to give you a non-German example, is a French book, although it's published in Augsburg by Hans Mark. This printer, however, does not appear in the bibliography of German printers, and this is the only known work by the printer. You can see an ornament bleeding through that title page, and there's the ornament. This ornament appears in another work in the French language. However, this work clearly lists in the imprint on the title page that it was from Paris. There was very few, if any, French printing in Augsburg at this time, so it is suspicious already in the fact that it's the only work by this printer. And this ornament is used in Paris in quite a few editions. I think this really shows the strength of Ornamento with its ability to search across geographic, linguistic, and national domains to really see an international network of print develop. I'd also like to conclude with my plans for future research. I'm really interested in looking at how images were used during the religious upheaval of the Protestant Reformation. So when Duke George of Saxony banned Luther's New Testament translation into German, it was not the text that he objected to, it was the images, which he found offensive for vilifying the Pope. So I would like to further investigate how Protestants and Catholics used images in their propaganda. Sexuality changed a lot during the Reformation. Priests could get married. Nuns no longer had to be celibate or chaste. So virginity was no longer the sexual ideal. So how are these new sexualities promoted by Protestants, or how are they denigrated by Catholics? I'm also interested in how different religious groups use images. For example, French Calvinists versus German Calvinists, was there iconography they shared, or were they different across geographic or linguistic areas? So this type of work will really focus on identifying objects within the images, training CNN to identify various objects. We have grant applications currently under review and other ones currently being written. Hopefully we can get funding for this type of research. I think this will be really important in investigating which iconographies were important to competing religious groups. And having already created a corpus of books with Ornamento and images, a corpus of images in this period that have the illustrations extracted, that big first step of creating the corpus has already been completed. So this is a natural progression for Ornamento, which I think will open up a new avenue of research into the transformation of visual culture in the early modern print industry. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Drew, for presenting us on this wonderful project. And again, we will discuss more. I have a few questions on the Ornamento project, but we will do that in the afternoon. Thank you. It is my pleasure now to introduce to you Ilaria Andreoli and Ilenia Maschietto from the Fondazione Cini. Ilaria, thank you, and Ilenia, thank you so much for joining us. I think we met in person last time in 2016 or so. So let's hope we will resume that at some point. You will talk about the Essling Lod project, objectives and issues, and with no further delay, the floor is yours. Yes.
Thanks to Matilda and Barbara. We are here today to discuss different methodologies for digitizing, cataloging, searching, and sharing images from the medieval and early modern period. Our Essling project that we are about to present is transversal to all these three activities. I try to share my screen. I think it's okay. Did you see my screen?
Yes, we don't hear you very, very loud, but I think we understand.
This is the highest that I can do.
Okay, yes.
Okay.
Yes, thank you.
I would like to underline the fact that we are two to coordinate this project, an art historian specializing in images in books and their circulations among the European printing network, myself, and a rare book librarian trained in the applications of new technologies to the management and enhancements of a rich rare book collection, Ilenia Maschietto, who will speak during this afternoon workshop. And I apologize because I won't be able to be with you this afternoon. Everything's happened during the 1st of October, so this is a shame. Our object is le livre à figure vénitien de la fin du XVe siècle et du commencement du XVIe, published between 1907 and 1914, a census of all illustrated books printed in Venice from the introductions of movable type to 1525. Its author is Victor Masséna, Duke of Rivoli, then Prince of Essling, nephew of a Napoleonic field marshal. He dedicated himself from 1885 to the double task of adding to exceptional collection of Venetian illustrated incunabola and 16th century books, and of studying them according to original heuristics. In the numerous and picturesque woodcuts that adorn popular booklets, as well as books made for the intellectual elites, Essling looked for testimonies about an Italian Renaissance hitherto known only through his masterpieces. Because of this quasi-archaeological concern, he pined for original purity in his books. This led him to have his copies washed, pressed, and whitened, and to cover them with flashy new bindings produced mostly in the Parisian L'Artic workshop. Only a few of the older ones survive. Their brilliantly colored skins and parchment always bore the not so discreet coat of arms of the Duke, and then after his brother's death in 1898 of the Prince of Essling, that makes them easily recognizable. Essling spent the last year of his life working on the book which remains his main claim to the fame, the Livre à figure vénitien de la fin du XVe siècle et du commencement du XVIe. Essling used in it the results of the systematic in-depth study, as well as impressive correspondences with curators and collectors in Europe, and of course the attentive examination of his own books that are indicated in the catalogue among the edition consulted or described by a printed little star. Essling organized the census of Venetian illustrated books chronologically, according to a genealogical approach similar to that employed in the natural sciences since Cuvier time. After the Editio Princeps, he indicated all subsequent illustrated editions until the middle years of the 16th century. Having identified and described each series of illustrations, Essling allows the reader not only to reconstruct a hierarchical orders in which he can situate instances of iconographic developments, but also to compare contemporary editions unite the same graphic style. The three books, divided into 6 hefty volumes of the Livre à figure, remain today the bibliographical reference for the study of illustrated Venetian books. They are essentials reading for bibliographers, historians of the book, librarians, rare book dealers, but also for the art historians seeking in illustrated books are reflections of contemporary art and a medium for their diffusion. The fate of the Essling Library is characterized by chance and good fortune. When it was put on sale, the learned Italian bookseller Tammaro de Marinis signaled the collection to Count Vittorio Cini, who decided to buy the Venetian core of the collection. The Count later gave it to the foundation he created on Venice San Giorgio Island. Almost all the Venetian editions once owned by Essling, those marked in the census with the little star, are now kept in the library on the Fondazione. It is extremely rare, or rather it is unique, that such an exceptional collection would have remained almost intact, remarkable both by the quality of the copies and by exceptional value as a source for the history of illustrated books and prints in Venice during the Renaissance. To be precise, the Livre à figure contains 2,889 entries, 2,585 unnumbered, 275 are not, and there is 29 more in the addenda. Around 500 bear the star and thus belong to the Esslin collection. The 10% of them could not be found in the holdings of the Fondazione Cini, probably because they were sold even before the cell catalog was prepared. As mentioned earlier, the 6th volume of the census presents all illustrated editions of a title as elements in a family tree where all successive editions follow the first one described. Because of the unique connoisseurships of the author, the census is much more than a mere list of books, thanks to its abundant notes, in which he gives detailed descriptions of illustration that he immediately compares with those present in other editions, and he very often reproduces in facsimile. This method could be considered as a prehistorical interlinking based on the personal knowledge of the scholar. The arborescent structures of the census, with the title of the work and the indication of all different illustrated editions, suggest the far-fetched idea that Esslin anticipated the functional requirement for bibliographical records, FRBR, model, on which are based the modern principle of cataloging, as well as the Esslin blog project. Each bibliographic descriptions in the printed census follow the main title with an information about the author, title, printer, publisher, date, and book format with a list of copies needed. Our aim is now to propose new means of access to all the wealth of these informations present in the census, as link and open data technology makes web searching more efficient and dynamic by linking to the initial search others relevant and unsuspected sources of information, allowing the user to use and reuse data at will. To accommodate the unique natures of the Esslin collections, where books are but vehicles for mobile images, to use a felicitous Warburg expression, made us conceive a digital tool that would allow easy navigation. Thanks to the support of Archive, the Center for Analysis and Recording of Cultural Heritage in Venice, established in 2018 on San Giorgio Island, we contacted Regesta.x, a service provider for digital archives, will help us publish the data in open and shared format with control, vocabularies, and formal ontologies in relations with open data that share the same features. All the census is not a simple list of editions. Neither is Blood Project a mere sequence of data, but a set of control and open data and metadata linked together. The RDF data model allows storage, exchange, and reuse of data that can be easily processed by a computer. We decided to use the semantic web tools because they facilitate the discovery of a new information asset, as well as the use of available data in order to produce a set of metadata with wide granularity levels. In accordance with FRBR model, the resources are described at three levels of abstractions: work, the short title, instance, editions, and item, the specific copy, just as in analogical form, the Prince of Esslin did. In particular, we used the BibFrame model to describe the data referring to the individual bibliographical quotes of the Esslin census and the Dublin core vocabulary metadata for more general information. For every bibliographical quote, we extract information that identifies the work according to its specific edition to express it through triple statements. Next, data are associated with the main digital resources and are linked to editions of the same work of the same editions as described in other national and international catalogs such as SPN, 816, ISTC, MEI, Searle, Thesaurus, and so on. Some of these digital records are already available, other needs to be generated, in particular those belonging to specific copies. An example from our back office will allow us to illustrate, albeit with raw data. The project is a work in progress for now, this process just described. Let's take the case of Fasciculus Medicinae, the title of the work in the purple circle. The title, clearly part of the broader Essling repertoire, the blue circle. It is represented by 9 illustrated Venetian editions, the orange circles. Of these 9 editions, Olin owned 3, those described with the stars, which are today kept in our library. By pointing to one of these, the princeps of 1491, we can see how the orange circle of the edition explodes between all the data. It is linked to author, printer, secondary responsibility, place and date of printing, but also the identifiers of EICC and SPN. In this case, because it is a copy owned by Essling, we can add more specific information, such as the shelf mark, descriptions of binding, and the notes about provenance. As it is an incunabulum, it will be described in material evidence and incunabula database, which is specific ID. Another development in providing access to the collections of rare books in the Fondazione Cini will be the digitizing of all the copies owned by Essling now in our collection, linked to the description in the census. Equally, in collaboration with Archive, at present, we are working on the definition of guidelines for a standard model suitable for rare book digitizations, and the digital copies will be then linked to the specific descriptions. So this is our call number, and this will be the digitizations of the copy. Because of the unique characters of its rare book collection, today based on the presence of the images where books were only considered as vehicle for movable images, and because of its constant policy, they aims and developing new tools to make them more accessible, the library of the Fondazione Cini, one of the most important art history library and photothèque in Europe, is well suited to develop with Lot a new relationship between the census and the collections, the text and the images. And this last example is to show you how not only the historiography of the iconography history of the images, but all we can put in parallel two images that are copies and reused or inspired by one images and reused in other copies. So strengthening the link between these two components will open the way to new research, hence new contributions to the ideal tree of knowledge. And I would like just to use some more seconds to present the online Archives Academy workshop on manipulation, digitizations, and publication of book and documentary heritage. It will be held in December at the Fondazione Cini, at 5 lectures dedicated to the manipulations of books and documents for the display and digitizations, but also of the triple IF protocol and its application in digitized libraries. And will be concluded with a focus on the transmediations of materiality of the book in the digital world. So if you are interested in this workshop, please visit the website to have more information. And thank you all for your attention.
Thank you very much, Ilaria, for your presentation, which was really interesting. We now have 13 minutes, more or less, for a brief pause, for a coffee and for the eyes, especially. I don't know about you, but these wonderful images are incredible, but there are many to look at. So we will resume at 12. And so, yes, take your time for a break. Thank you very much.
Are we starting to get back? It's me again moderating this session, which is going to be the last of this morning. And I am very pleased to open it with Flavia Bruni from the Istituto Centrale per il Catalogo Unico, who is specialized obviously in early printed books, digital humanities, the history of libraries, and many other beautiful things. And her presentation this morning will be about Edit16 2021, new user interface, new tools, and new chances for interoperability. Thank you, Flavia. I can already see your screen. So
okay, good. That's
everything
good.
is working. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Matilde, for this nice introduction. And first of all, I want to express my gratitude to Barbara and Matilde, indeed, for inviting me to this very rich seminar, which is a wonderful chance for me to present the new Edit16, which will be hopefully launched next month. This is going to be a very brief presentation and mainly focused on the management of images in the online catalog for Edit16, which, as many as you already know, is not a project focusing on images itself, but it does include images and links to digital copies. I am not going to take, so this is not going forward. Okay, I'm not going to take much of your time now to introduce Edit16, as this would take a long time, and I'm confident enough that many of you will be already familiar with this interface, which basically stayed the same since its launch in March 2000 over the last 21 years. The database has grown over time, of course, with some relevant changes. I will just mention the addition of copies of foreign libraries in 2017, but it never affected in a significant way the presentation of data on the website. Edit16 currently comprises 68,000 records described in edition and over 65,000 images of significant pages of books, such as title pages, colophons, and end of the text, dedications and printers devices, and about 16,000 links to external digital copies. In 2017, the Central Institute for the Union Catalogue of Italian Libraries, which beside the Italian SBN also runs several fundamental databases such as Manus Online, the Registry of Italian Libraries, and indeed the Survey of 16th Century Italian Editions, Edit16, embarked on a project to build a shared access point to all its databases. The complete refurbishment of Edit16 as well as of SBN and Manus Online took place within this framework. Edit16 data are also going to appear among the results of searches performed through this new portal named Alphabetica, which is going to be launched at the end of November this year. I will now focus on the new Edit16 features related to image visualization. Images are, and already were, often included in our records related to editions and always included in the description of printers' devices. Our repository of printers' devices is a reference tool itself, currently comprising 2,500 devices. We have worked hard to the new website to add more sources, improve search and visualization tools in order to make images easier to find, and more useful and handy to compare between each other. In the new advanced search, we included filters to allow users to select records including images of significant pages, such as title page and colophon, which are stored in our own repository, or links to digital copies, which might be coming from SBN, from other partner databases, or from external sources as well. In the list of results, a user will be able to filter to see only records including images, to see which records do include images. They also have a thumbnail preview, as you can see, or to browse only through the images with this link on top. In the previous website, images were not embedded within bibliographic records. An icon with an eye on top of the record was meant to show that one or more images were available by clicking on the icon itself. They were simply displayed one below the other in a vertical sequence. In the new website, images are instead embedded within the record and can be visualized and compared through a tool that we already have heard about today, which is Mirador. So I will now try to show something from the live website because I think it's more useful. So you can have here a preview of our new Edit 16. I think it's a spoiler and it's the first time we are showing it. So we have below the record in this first example, just one image, which because we just have one image in our repository that can be zoomed in and out. In this second example, this one includes more images which can be arranged within a side by side view. I hope it's going to, yeah, here it is. So we have two images here, and this is particularly useful in this case as we can decide which image to display. For instance, here we can compare the device on the title page and the one on the colophon, which is apparently the same. In this third example, we have we can compare two. We can decide what to show, and we can have more than two images, for instance, and we can compare a variant title page. For instance, this is variant A, and variant B of the same edition. You see in the variant A, there was no I after the L, and in the variant B, there is. We are still testing the functionalities and discussing which is the best way to present them. So it might be that the final version will be slightly different. For instance, we are not sure what to show first when a user come to this record, but this will be basically it. Another big change we have, and also digital copies are included in this visualization tool. So, for instance, in this fourth example, we have two images, but we can see if we open the Mirador viewer, we also have a complete digital edition of this work that we can arrange to compare with the images we already have. Of course, we can also close them and decide what we want to see. And another great feature of this tool is that we are also able to add external resources to it. For instance, here we just have one, I forgot to delete that, but we can add external resources. For instance, I can, as long as they are IIIF, so for instance, I can take the link to this resource from the John Rylands Library of Manchester and copy and paste the link here, add it here, and it will display in the Mirador. So I've already done it before, but this is the final result. When we started working on this new website, we were particularly careful to maintain all the functionalities that we had in the previous version, of course. Among these, the possibility to split the screen in order to compare printer devices, which may vary for very small details. So this is the old database. For instance, we can look for significant word and see the images and split the screen and compare images to see what it's, for instance, if we are looking at the book and see which is the device we have, and be aware of all the small, tiny differences among them. With the embedding of the new viewer that we just have seen, we managed to keep and improve this crucial facility of Edit 16, as well as to extend it to other sections of the database on which it was not available before, as we have seen now in edition records. I will switch back to the presentation for the final part, if I manage to. Okay. As previously mentioned, Edit 16 will be part of a network. The same tool for image visualization will also be included in the other websites comprising the network, which are, of course, the SBN Manus Online and the new access point Alphabetica. And so this will allow a more extensive and comprehensive comparison among resources coming from all the ICO network, and of course also including Edit 16 data. We are and were well aware of the risk of changing the reference website, which was certainly old-fashioned, but also greatly valued by the international community of scholars researching on early printed books. And we really hope our efforts, which are still in progress, will eventually succeed in making what was already a wonderful resource even more popular and useful to our devoted community of users. And any question or suggestion, please drop me a line. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Flavia. It was exciting to see all this news coming up. Thank you very much for sharing it with us in advance, and also for your for being very careful about the time. Yes. I will now move on to the second speaker of this session, who is Harald Klinke from the Ludwig Maximilian Universität in Munich. He has been active in the development of digital tools for the visual analysis of images in particular. And his paper, his presentation will be on the use of distant viewing in art history, feature extraction, dimension reduction, and the grammar of images. So please, Harald, I leave you the word and the screen.
Yes, thank you very much. Can you hear me well?
Yes, perfectly.
Good. Then I will share my screen here. So thank you very much for the invitation as well. And thanks for all the projects that have been presented so far. And it's interesting to see how much is changing in the realm of art history, how many databases are created, how many corpora we digitize and make available via websites and other possibilities, other tools, and so on. And at this point, I would like to remind ourselves a little bit why we do that. Why do we use digital methods? Why do we create databases? And I believe it's for one reason, because we want to understand the history of art better. We want to understand the development of artworks, of cultural heritage over time, or at least we want to understand a very specific subset of art history better with the use of tools. We want to give access to artworks via digital tools and digital data. And there are many possibilities to do so. Some of them are having a website where we can search with keywords, where we can zoom into an image and so on, which is rather textual. And another way of doing so is rather image-based. And for that reason, I would like to show you, and I hope the browser is now in your site. I would like to show you a project that I've done. It's very beta. It's not public yet, but if you like, you can copy that URL here and you can try it out for yourself. Our Department of Art History has its own database that we have created for teaching purposes mostly, and I've taken those images in order to make such a visual visualization, so a visualization of images. And what you can see here is a big cluster of small images. And the great thing about this here is you can zoom in and, for example, see that in this cluster we have portraits, mostly photos, photo portraits. If you zoom out again, you can see that here we have portraits in painting, for example. And if we zoom out once again and pan a little bit to the bottom, we can see this cluster, for example, where we have all the abstractionism. And if we want, we can even move in some further and get the metadata and more information on that images. So these are today quite common tools how we can use and handle a lot of data, a lot of information, a lot of objects from art history. And the great thing about the use of digital tools such as this is that we have access to, if you like, millions or at least thousands and thousands of images, and get and zoom out and get an overview that is, we have a kind of distant viewing approach to it, that we see certain structures in this corpus, and we can zoom in and do a kind of close viewing and maybe find an object that we wouldn't have found before, because in the spatial proximity that we have here, we can find maybe an object that was hard to find earlier because it's kind of similar to another one that we know already. So this project that I show you here itself is not what I want to talk about. As a matter of fact, I want to talk about how we are using images and how we can approach large visual corpora of images in art history. And for that reason, I go back to my presentation, because what I would like to talk about is transformations and abstractions. So if we want to use all digital methods in order to access the history of art, well, at first we have to think about what is the history of art? How can we access the history of art? I believe we access the history of art via its objects that are still in existence of the past. We cannot access the past itself because we're living in present times, but there's still objects that tell us about the past, and then we can write our history of art. But if we want to make use of digital possibilities, of novel ways of accessing that, we do the process of digitization. That is, we have seen that before, we do take photos, for example, that is visual data. We add metadata to it, the creation date, the artist, the title, and so on. But we also know that data is just a kind of representation of the physical object, and it's a certain kind of representation in a digital format. And we all know a lot is lost there. If you take a two-dimensional photo, for example, you lose all the three-dimensionality. You have troubles with color management and so on. But the data that you have are a kind of representation of what you're looking for, that particular object in relation to other objects. And that constitutes what we sometimes call big data in our area, big image data, because we're dealing with visual images, with visual data mostly. But we cannot access them all together. What we need is we need to reduce the amount of data. We cannot work with each and every pixel. We need to reduce the amount of properties that we have to deal with. And that is the second phase of abstraction and transformation that's called feature extraction. Feature extraction means that we kind of automatically describe each and every image by its very particular properties or features, if you will. That can be very low level features such as average brightness, average color. It could be something that is more structural, like edges or corners and so on, or higher levels such as a label that says in this picture is a dog or a cat or something else, or a particular scent and so on. So we have low-level features and high-level features. And the more features we extract from those images, the better, because we can in more detail describe those images. And we put all those objects in what's called a feature space. It's actually a multi-dimensional feature space. For example, the ResNet algorithm gives us 1024 different features that describe each and every image. But even those 1024 features that are in a 1024 dimensional feature space are still too many that we as humans can grasp. So then again, where there's a third phase where we have a certain transformation that's called dimensionality reduction. And that dimensionality reduction means no one can imagine a space that is bigger than 3 or 4 dimensions, but the computer can somehow map those dimensions to something, for example, 2 or 3 dimensional, that we can browse through and click through, pan and zoom through. And that in the end is what we might call a meta image with which we can interact. So how is this multi-dimensionality? How can we imagine that? Well, in a very simple way, this example here, we only have 2 dimensions. That is on the x-axis, the time, and on the y-axis, saturation, the average saturation of each image. I've taken the Museum of MoMA photos because they are easy to get, and there are many. So every object, every image in this image plot makes some sense where it is in this coordinate system. For example, the more it is to the left, the older it is, the more it is to the top, the more colorful it is, or the higher the saturation is. So every object is placed in that 2-dimensional coordinate system, and its meaning in that spatial proximity to each other is defined by those axes. Now, let's say we have 3 dimensions. How can we map 3 dimensions to 2? Well, the easiest example, the simple example is a 3-dimensional object, such as this one, can be mapped to 2 dimensions on a shadow. How does that work? We simply drop 1 dimension, the depth, and take the other 2 dimensions and map it to a 2-dimensional space, like on this wall here. But we can hardly imagine a 1024 dimensions feature space. So we need to map that onto 2 dimensions as well. And there are different algorithms. I just list some of them here. And the most useful, or the most used actually, is the TSNE map. It's called, or also pronounced TSNE map, which I will use in the following. Again, you can take any example you wish. I've just taken the Museum of Modern Art objects once again. I've extracted certain features from them, I think not more than 10. So you have a 10-dimensional feature space, and you use TSNE mapping in order to map it onto 2 dimensions. And what you can see here, there are certain clusters of this brownish cluster here of probably brownish paper or drawings on paper, and you have something black and white on this cluster and so on. However, what you see here is not it is a kind of truth, because there is clustering, but we should keep in mind, looking at such images, that the process of digitization has been a transformation. The feature extraction has been a kind of abstraction, and the choice of features also depends on the choice of features where the objects are placed. And the dimensionality reduction, again, is an abstraction to this 2-dimensional space. And the funny thing here is we might want to zoom in that image and think there is certain similarity in proximity, but the S in TSNE means stochastic, and stochastic means there's a kind of a factor that is a little chance or a little probability in there. Because if you run that mapping process again and again, you get different images in the end, which are still quite similar. For example, this brownish cluster that appears in different places, but they still keep their proximity to each other. And now there's no axis that means anything. It's just a kind of internal semantics that in which those images make sense because they are in closeness or distance to other images. So if we look at images such as these here, they do make sense. On the left hand, for example, if we are searching for the Oath of Horatii, we see that image that we're looking for on the left, and we see it surrounded by kind of similar ones like the preliminary drawing or parts of that image or images from possibly the same period. But if you go to the right, we might wonder, what does this spatial proximity actually mean? How is that similar or not similar to each other? And also, why is there a black space, and what is in there, what could be in there, or why is there nothing? So looking at meta images and exploring those images, there are certain challenges. And on the right side, you see the famous example from Google Arts and Culture. Here we wonder, what do these axes of topography mean here? Well, no one explains it to us. This is something we need to find out ourselves. Also, what kind of similarity does spatial proximity actually represent? For example, what is so similar about this one and that one? These are questions that are not actually new. We have been talking about Abby Warburg already and his kind of mapping techniques. And what he has assembled on his blackboards is not only similar in visually similar, but kind of semantic similar on different levels of meaning. So how could we bring those levels of meaning into our data set? Maybe we should not approach it visually only, but we should bring into account semantics and network. And that network in part, or at least the technology exists already. If you look at linked open data like Wikidata, we have a different kind of proximity, like what is depicted there, in which collections it is, who else has been working on it, and so on. So if we also take that into account as a level of data, maybe that will help us more than just a visual similarity, and we receive a more meaningful visualization than before. I skip this one and continue with other challenges. I have more questions than answers in my talk here. What are the features of images that we need for which kind of research? And I believe for different research questions, we need different kinds of features and maybe also different kinds of dimensionality reductions. How do meta images help us understanding the history of art in a novel way? And I believe that is the great opportunity here. How can we learn to read metadata by making use of visual studies, what we call Bildwissenschaft in Germany, or semiotics or other image theories? How to understand what such images of big image data show, also what they hide and what they make us believe they often are deceiving. And in the end, how to develop critical user interface studies for art history, because more and more we are sitting in front of computer screens and less we are in museums and galleries. So we are using user interfaces that present us this corpus of images in a certain way, and we need to understand how they're generated, how they're presented, what's the mathematics behind it in the end, in order to evaluate which algorithms are most helpful for us, for the things we want to do, that is understanding the history of art. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Harald. I must say this was absolutely fascinating. I'm also seeing some comments in the chat. Thank you for, through the art historical perspective, reminding us that the questions we can basically pose us are limitless, but we always have to focus on the right questions for the material that we have and to develop and think about them. It's not just because we have the tools, then we should be, compelled to do certain things. I mean, we should be doing them if we really need them or if they're relevant to us, basically. So I think this is a very important point of view. So thank you for.
Thank you. I think we have lots to talk about in the afternoon.
Exactly. So let's move. Basically, we now move to the other side of the ocean, which I'm extremely happy about. Thank you for our American participants and American friends who have been joining us since the very earliest hours of the morning. For them, we have two projects represented. The first one is the Basira project. So we will be moving from talking we've been talking a lot about images in books, and we will now be talking about images of books, I think. Barbara Ellertson, who is the principal investigator of the project with Nick Herman and Do Emery, will be talking about images as windows, the Basira project. Thank you, Barbara.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for inviting the Basira project to take part in this wonderful workshop. We are so glad to have a chance to exchange notes and learn from other teams of researchers. So in the next 15 minutes, I hope to give you an overview of the Basira project, a look at our linked records and actions in our database, and a few of the many challenges we have faced and continue to face. But first, quickly, I would like to introduce you to the Basira team, which is myself. I worked in academic publishing for decades and have designed and produced close to at least 1,000 books. I am delighted to be able to work with Dr. Andrea Zietlow, who joined Basira in 2017 and lends to us her expertise in bookmaking and bookbinding. Dr. Nicholas Herman is curator of manuscripts at the Schoenberg Institute for Manuscript Studies, University of Pennsylvania. He is co-PI with me of the Crest Digital Art History Grant, which is one of the primary reasons we're able to do this work. And Douglas Emery is the digital content programmer and management of cultural heritage computing at the Schoenberg Institute. And Judith Weston is a PhD candidate at Pennsylvania who has been helping us as part of her internship funded by the Price Lab. So what is the Basira project? The acronym stands for Books as Symbols in Renaissance Art. We primarily are focused on the interaction of book history and European art during the Renaissance, which we very loosely define as 1300 to 1600. It is essentially a database of images tagged with structured details, hoping to support studies in a wide variety of disciplines, some of which are listed here. And that lens gives us one of our primary conundrums, which we'll look at a little bit more later. I would talk to you a little bit about our goals. We mentioned art history and book history. Of course, tools for searches, looking for patterns. I want to particularly mention that the end product will be an open database available to anyone with a web browser. And in particular, we've learned that not only scholarly, but also lay audiences are interested. We find that focusing on the book as object provides interested lay people with a way into an engagement with the art, which has been a surprisingly wonderful development to find. Our scope and status is that we are in the process of ending tier 1, which is these 3 steps. moving the database from its original platform, FileMaker Pro, into a custom developed into content management system written by performance software in Ruby on Rails using MySQL and JavaScript. And Doug Emery, who will join us this afternoon, can talk a great deal more about that. We are very much hoping to be able to develop and launch the public search interface this coming winter. That depends somewhat on funding. And then ultimately, we aim to incorporate IIIF image management and linked open data and later phases of the project. And I'll show you our brand new launch page, which brings up 6 random images from the collection. And let me catch up with myself. I will say that we've arbitrarily, constrained the time frame, and also our focus at the moment is essentially Western European art, but we hope eventually that the tools we're developing will be useful for cultures beyond Europe. And now we'll quickly look at our schema and architecture. One of the things we'll first look at is how we are breaking down a complex work of art, particularly a multi-paneled altarpiece, into its component parts, and the fact that we are attaching data to the components in relationship to their connection to the book. So the book is the primary actor in our database. The closer we are to the book, the more granular the detail is. The further away we get, the more generalized it is. And one of the things I wanted to demonstrate is that, of course, as with virtually any database, there's many, and one-to-many connections. I'm going to show you very quickly this schematic of the data model. Please don't try to read this, but the point is that the work of art is broken to its physical components, then its visual context, and then within each visual context will be one or more documents. And that's what we're going to look at next, but essentially locations, people, repositories, and actions are all shared across the entire database. So here is a very complex altarpiece. I believe that Nick told me there are 47 books in this particular work of art. And the way we're breaking it out, we're going to look at one panel just to demonstrate the concept of a visual context within a component. And each visual context contains one or more books. And so that's what we'll see in the way we've structured this in the database. So now this is the new interface. And this particular image I've chosen to look at quickly, this entire painting is the artwork. So there's only one physical component, but within this image, there are actually 7 visual contexts, and each context contains one or more books. And we'll look down at the level of the book just to give you an idea. This is the top record of the artwork. Each tab contains specific tags unique to this particular image. In this case, 2 titles, German and English. And when we go all the way down, we've jumped now to the document record. And these are the external details. These are supported with, I believe, 50 value lists, which administrators can edit. And one of the conundrums that I'll present that has been a challenge to Biblicima and will continue to be a challenge to Biblicima is the fact that we are at times working with material that we members of the team are not necessarily experts on. We've relied heavily on our board of advisors. I want to give a shout out to particularly Georgios Boudalis and Alberto Campagnolo for help in developing the control vocabulary we're using for binding details in particular. So this is the external details, the internal details of this particular image. In this instance, the text in the image is not legible. If it were, we would try to identify the script in the language and possibly at least a partial transcription. So one of the things that I think might be unique to the Basira database is the concept of actions, which is of the way that we are expressing the relationship of actor to object. And I wanted to mention that this concept of action was the brilliant insight of Nick Herman. This is the current list of actions in the database. Most of these have reciprocals. So we have these, if you will, the verbs of the phrases, and we'll go to the dialogue boxes for the actions. So in this instance, this book, so we're now down at the book level. We are seeing the visual context, which is in this case, the book being written in by Jerome. The book is also touched by Jerome, and the book is resting, standing, or lying upon a table. So there's one more level down below this, which is that you can attach descriptors and body identifiers to that particular action. And these will all be, of course, searchable with facets within the public search interface. And see, now I'm going to show you some of the challenges and compromises. So one of the briefs for this workshop was not to necessarily spend so much time on the interface, is to talk about our challenges, of which there are so many, we can't possibly go into them all, Matilde. I believe that we could say we've successfully navigated the construction of the schema, which took our team the better part of a year. We are now deep into the challenge of data integrity assurance, especially across a team of members doing data input. One of the challenges I'll touch on in a moment is that because our records are so very detailed, it's very time consuming to enter those records. So we are having a trade-off between granularity of data and time investment in completing those records. We could probably talk all morning about control vocabulary. We are primarily relying on the Getty vocabularies, but also we're of course going to talk about Iconclass in just a moment. Yes. So let's see, we have more challenges. Fuzzy dates, historical geography. I just mentioned the cost. Mentioned our board of advisors guiding us in the metadata. And the one we'll actually explore more this afternoon, iconography. I don't know if I'll have time to mention my own personal bête noire, which is nested metadata. These are some of the iconography challenges. I will confess fully and openly that one of my challenges in working this material is that I grew up a Protestant, and I am not intimately familiar from birth with Catholic iconography. And I, for example, struggle with which St. James is being portrayed in a particular image. So one of the ways we are trying to address that is that every record in the Basira database will be reviewed by other team members before it's made public. And we hope in that way to be sure and establish clean data. Hans Brandhorst this morning mentioned the iconographic continuum and the challenge of connecting an abstract concept to a concrete object. We are continuing to work on ways to address that and hope to work more closely with Etienne and Hans in employing Iconclass in a very astute and semantically rich way. And we have a goal of, as I mentioned earlier, expanding our coverage so that we can include more belief systems outside the European Christian traditions in the future. This is the current list of iconography tags that has arisen from our data.
Barbara, I give you the 2 minutes, 1 minute,
okay,
2 minutes.
Thank you. Yes, I'm virtually done. Yes. I will go. I'm going to have to skip over my nested hierarchy obsession. We'll come back to that maybe some other day. We have other challenges. Sample size is large enough for statistical significance is one I'm particularly concerned about. Funding, of course. Building and flexibility for including other objects. We've had expressed interest in both botanical illustrations in some of the pages of books that have portrayed musical instruments, furniture, and for that I would make reference to Real Online and their very rich resource. And I'm going to wrap this up by offering anybody who would like a tour of the Basira database to please write us an email. We'd be delighted to give you an insider's view. And I hope that this will be public and available this winter. And I thank you.
Thank you. Sorry if I had to be a bit abrupt. I would like a tour of the Basira database, by the way. So maybe we can arrange that. Yeah. So thank you very much for that. Your list of challenges, I think, could be a manifesto maybe for every project in this field. And I very much feel like we all know about that very well, and we're trying to coping with that each in our own way. And I look forward to discussing them more in detail this afternoon. So thank you, Barbara, and thank you to the whole Basira team. We now move to our final presentation this morning, which is about the index of medieval art, which is based at Princeton University. I am glad that we are concluding this morning with a presentation on the index, which is basically a big institution. You know, we have started off talking about Iconclass and Avi Warburg's work, and we now can finish with the index, which you know, represents a milestone in the history of gathering, cataloging, and sharing images in different forms, and has undergone, I believe, in the last more than a century now, a lot of transformations, which we're all very curious to hear about from Maria Alessia Rossi, who is currently a member of the Index research team. So Maria Alessia, whenever you wish, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much for the introduction, and thank you to you and Barbara for organizing such a fascinating event. So let me, let me know if you can see the PowerPoint and hear me.
Yes,
perfect.
We do.
So today I will talk to you about the index, its history and mission, and I will also show you briefly how to use the index and address some of our most recent features and challenges. So let's start from the beginning, just a few introductory slides. What is the index? It's a century-old thematic archive and subscription database, and it covers approximately 100,000 work of art records, over 200,000 images from the medieval period. And by medieval period, we have a very broad notion of it. So we go from early Christianity to the 16th century. We have more than 40 languages and 10,000 locations. These works of art, we kind of cover all media. So including metalwork, mosaic, sculpture, illuminated manuscripts, ivories, frescoes, and stained glass windows, just to name a few. Our mission is to facilitate research on medieval visual traditions and their significance in context. And I should point out that behind the digital interface that we will be talking about, we have a staff of 4 specialists plus the director, who develop and maintain the database, but we're also available for research consultation. We assist in local classroom instructions, and we host research workshops and conferences on site. So how did we get to where we are today? The index was founded in 1917 by Charles Rufus Maury, and it originally took the form of a series of card files housed in 2 shoeboxes at Princeton University. Very quickly, this endeavor grew into an elaborate system of physical files divided in 2 collections. The first is a collection of photographs filed on cards classified by medium. So I have 2 examples here, and you can see ivory on the left and crystals on the right.
Turn it off.
And
Barbara, sorry, I think you have your yeah. Great.
And within that, they are by medium. So say that you're interested in the frescoes of the Church of San Panteleimon in Rezzi, you would go and look first for wall paintings, and then under the letter N, you would find your location. Alternatively, you could use our second collection that follows a thematic iconographic grouping arranged on cards filed alphabetically in this case, with the iconographical subject as the primary descriptor. So if you're interested in Adam and Eve, you just go to the letter A. If you're interested in Christ's miracles, you go to Christ and you will find them. So the index built such a strong reputation in time that by the 1960s, it was obvious to everyone that, and I quote, no serious medievalist would think of writing a research paper without at some point checking with the index at Princeton, unquote. And this was mostly due to talented, knowledgeable, and determined female scholars who devoted their careers to the development of the index. By 1992, the first index database was transformed as a subscription platform, and the first digitization of the historic collection took place. Starting then, the print copies that you just saw in the previous slides were no longer updated. However, by the early 2010s or 2000s, the index was in need of a new search platform. So during the year of the index centennial, a new fully customized database was released. And more recently, we have just completed a system-wide update that includes a new welcome page, new search options, more easy access to the results and to the filtering, and the development of a subject classification network. And I will tell you more about several of these features in a second. So how does the index work? So the homepage of the database allows for a simple keyword search. Is one of the many ways to start to get to know our content. And on the upper right corner, so here I just tried a random keyword, camel, but it could have been centaur as we've seen earlier. And what you see is the results and thumbnails of the different items and works of art that have that specific keyword. But you could also, go for specific name figures. Is that what you're interested? So you can look for Noah, but also compound terms. So Noah and dove, Virgin Mary and globe, and so on. If you click on one of the works of art, you will find the image at the top, and then an array of information as you scroll down, which I divided into different screenshots. So you'll have the location, the date, media, subjects, description, and citations. If you know exactly what you're looking for, you can use our filters. So in this case, if you know you want to see only episodes of the marriage at Cana in the Byzantine territories, you add the subject Christ Miracle of Cana. You add the style and culture, and you will have 12 records. If you are even more detailed in your search, you could say, add the date range filter. So I only want to see Christ Miracle of Cana in the Byzantine territories between the 12th and the 15th century. But you could also add that you're only interested in specific media or locations, if you know specifically what you're looking for. So what I want to point out is that while subject headings like camel or marriage at Cana go a long way, and we've seen how often they're used and how important it is, the subject taxonomy, they do not mean that you will, of course, find the same information once you open up the work of art record. So take two instances of Christ healing the paralytic at the pool of Bethesda. They have been cataloged in the database with the same subject heading, as the narrative refers to the same biblical reference. But iconographically, these two images couldn't be further away from each other. And I will explain why this is so important to us in a second. So in the first example, you can see you have an architectural background, two apostles on the left, the disabled figure on the bed. He is then represented again on the right. So he's doubled and he's accompanied by two figures. The work of art on the right is simply representing the disabled figure already carrying the bed on the back. Christ, this would be the description that we would have in the index, cross-named, scroll in left hand, right hand extended. So the subject heading groups together the same narratives, but it is the description that allows for the real iconographic research. So in fact, what we think that makes it, what we really believe that makes the index unique is the description field. Our job as catalogers is to record every significant iconographic detail in the scene that the researcher might be interested in. In fact, when new catalogers are trained, the first thing that they're being told is that the index description translates in words what the eyes see. This field should mirror the image to such a clarity and exhaustiveness that the researcher should be able to clearly visualize the iconography before looking at the image. And that's why we also often say that we're not an image database. We are an iconographic database. So another way to search, if you are more interested in browsing and seeing and finding different ways to approach the art historical records, is the browse list. So there are 16 browse lists, and most of them are in alphabetical order. And this is a great sense, as I was saying, to get an idea of the content and coverage of the index holdings. We have a browse list for work of art types. You can see here different titles, media, creator, patrons, locations, and so on. So say you're interested in creators, you will click on the creator list and you will find an alphabetical list of all the creators. By clicking on the name of the creator you're interested in, you will be provided with a general note, as you can see at the top, alternate names, bibliographical citations, profession, associated works of art, that is at the bottom, with all the works of art that are associated and linked to this creator. So I earlier mentioned the subject classification list, and this is a newly developed browse list, but it's slightly different, as we wanted to offer researchers the opportunity to explore the database from a thematic point of view and not an alphabetical one. So it's divided in the 5 main subject classifications: history, nature, religious subjects, society and culture, and symbol, concept, and ornament. And it's no different than some of the other subject taxonomies that we've looked at earlier today. So how it works, it's that it just opens up and shows you the different subcategories. So if you go into society and culture, you can see how from the screenshots from left to right, you will open up in society and culture, you have a series of garments and accessories, human activities, objects and rituals, but we are very interested in musical instruments, so we're going to be looking at utensils and objects. And when you open up utensils and objects, you will find musical instruments, and within that, the whole taxonomy of the index. So this is a great way to just browse what kind of instruments do you have? Well, I'm really interested in rattles. I'm going to click on it and I'll have all the thumbnails of rattles in the index. So finally, there's one of our most recent features that we're still developing, and it's the location in structure hierarchy. So now we're moving to monumental art. And we have developed this field with the aim to offer researchers an overall view of the monumental structure that holds the work of art record, be it a capital, in this case a mosaic, but it could be a fresco, a stained glass window that the researcher is interested in. So I picked the Hagia Sophia because I'm biased and I'm a Byzantinist. So in this, what happens is you have your record, and if you click on the location in structure hierarchy, you will be, it will open up and it will show you the entire overview of that building. First of all, it will show you what work of art you're looking at and so where you're located, but it will also give you a sense of what else is in the building independently of the medium of the other works of art. So any media is included. And it will also help the researcher get a sense of what else is in that space. And so that might be, spatially important in the interpretation of that work of art specifically. So let me spend the last few minutes talking about the challenges we face. And I think there are a lot of challenges that we all have in common. In our specific case, a lot of it comes from the fact that we are a century-old database, and that is like a remarkable legacy to have. But it also requires the ability to preserve whilst updating. So this is of particular relevance when encountering issues of outdated language and scholarship. We have, constant new developments in the field and new avenues of inquiry, and that requires us to be on top of it and also change and update constantly. So for a long time, we should put the spotlight on some of the things we have edited, so you can't find it anymore, thankfully, but we had headings such as fabulous figure Mongol to describe the Kublai Khan, the ruler of the Mongol Empire, in the Book of Travels of Marco Polo. We also had one of our subjects was Thomas A. Becket instead of Thomas Becket, preserving the archaic spelling. So we have a lot of updating, and language is one of our most important and time-consuming challenges. Similarly, 100 years after its foundation, the Index of Christian Art, as it's formally known, revised its name to the Index of Medieval Art. And this is really important as a challenge because due to its original emphasis on Christian material, most of our holdings deal with Western Europe and Byzantine art. But now we're working towards the inclusion of new material, less traditionally medieval, ranging from the Eastern Mediterranean and North Africa, including, just to say a few, like Ethiopia and Armenia, to Jewish and Islamic works of art. Expanding the geography and the cultural traditions that we include leads us to yet another challenge. That is the question of
Alessia, you have 1 more minute.
Perfect. Okay, yeah, I'm just going to finish this up. So it's how we prioritize what we catalog and at the pace at which we go. And I think Barbara kind of also pointed this out. So the availability of images and our desire to always include new works of art is limitless, as we were saying. But as I was showing you earlier, we have so many fields to include for each record, and the descriptions themselves require in-depth researcher work. So we often find ourselves weighing the pros and cons of a volume approach. How many works of art can we physically and mentally catalog in a certain amount of time? And versus the depth approach. So how thorough are our records going to be? And just to finish up and say that we are having the same issue of St. James just recently. So we are all on the same in the same boat, because we have also been trying to divide up to write notes and identify which St. James is which. So I think the afternoon discussion is going to be fantastic. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alessia. Yes, I agree. I think it's going to be a very rich discussion and I look forward to it. I would like to close this last session thanking all the speakers and all the participants. The presentations you gave were absolutely amazing, and I think we all really enjoyed them very much and very, full of hints and food for thought, absolutely. Before leaving the floor to Barbara, who will wrap up and make some final remarks on this morning as well, I would like to thank very much Elena Alessandra from the Venice Center for Digital and Public Humanities, who's been with us all the way through this morning, making sure that everything was working well, and also has worked a lot to the preparation of this workshop and put a lot of effort and time in it. And I would also like to acknowledge and to thank the director of the center, who's Professor Franz Fischer, who's been with us more or less for the whole morning, which is a great thing, and it was a great pleasure. And yeah, just to acknowledge his presence and thank him for being here. And now I think I can leave the floor to Barbara. I will see you or some of you again this afternoon for what promises to be a very dense and long afternoon, and hopefully fruitful afternoon of exchange and discussion. Thank you very much, Barbara.
Yes, thank you, Matilde. I thank you, and I join you in thanking all the participants and all the speakers with their wonderful presentations. It was really, for me, a very interesting morning. I have to say I learned a lot, because many of these projects I knew, but some I didn't, and some I didn't know in so much detail. I also want to join you in thanking Elena Alessandra and Franz Fischer. They've been wonderful in the preparation and the technical aspects of this workshop. Yes, I mean, there are no final remarks, so to speak. What I think this morning shows is really a diversified landscape of projects, which are wonderful in themselves, but I see a lot of potential for collaborations and cooperation. I was also following a bit the chat and the Twitter links, so I see Etienne and Regis already spoke about some technical issues. There have been some realizations of a common ground, which I'm very happy for it. I think what emerges is that we do all face challenges, both from technical points of view and from more theoretical points of view. But it shows that although we are dealing with different materials and different projects from different institutions, there is a sort of fil rouge that links, a red thread that links all of our projects. And that has to do with the ability to critically choose, collect the material and the ways of cataloging and digitizing it. So there is really no possibility for me to resume or to make a short summary of everything, because we've been witnessing so many wonderful things. But I would like to take advantage of these 10 minutes we have before lunch and before resuming in the afternoon, when we'll certainly speak more about each topic on the 4 roundtables which we organized. I would like to leave the floor to the speakers, actually, and to the participants. If you could turn on your video, that would be wonderful, just to let it be more personal in the final remarks, and to say hi or bye to those of you who cannot be there in the afternoon. And yes, again, thank you very much. And please, I open the floor to you and to remarks that you might have.
And to any questions, I saw that there were a lot of, actually the chat since very early on in the morning has been full of interesting, suggestions and exchanges. So you're all more than welcome to, I don't know, save the chat or do whatever you want with it, basically. But I see that there have been some questions answered already. If you have more questions, if anyone from the public has more questions for the speakers, we have a few minutes, so we might be able to talk about something. Everyone is asking whether this will be online, available online, so the recording will be available online on the website of the Venice Center for Digital and Public Humanities, I believe.
Yes,
is
exactly.
That right?
The YouTube channel, and then also the website. So it will be available. I don't know, Franz, do you want to say something or to add something to this morning as a director of the center and host of this conference, this workshop?
Oh, I think it's better, the time is better used if the experts say something, so the presenters and those who have participated and didn't have the time to pose questions. So please go ahead, everyone.
Or anyone.
If there are no questions immediately, so thank you very much, Barbara and Matilda, for
maybe we can
bringing together such an illustrious group of experts and scholars from those field of image studies, art history, book studies. So it's really fascinating, and I know we have many project ideas, and yeah, we want to connect to all these. So there's something in all of these projects, and yeah, take benefit of the workshop meetings in the afternoon.
I am sure we will. So maybe if there are no remarks from the speakers or from the public, from the audience, maybe we could take advantage of these extra like 4 minutes that we have to add to the lunch break or to the breakfast break for you people in the US. And then we are going to meet again, and this will be at 2:30 Rome time, basically. So we will see you in an hour and 15 minutes again, more or less.
The other room.
Am I right? Yeah, perfect.
Yes.
So thank you very much, everyone. Again, it was a